Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The rain fell in sheets against the wide windows of the Hale residence, casting rippling shadows across the hardwood floors. Jesse Hale stood at the kitchen island, methodically chopping vegetables for dinner with a precision that defined every aspect of his life. At 38, Jesse had built his world on order and control, from his position as head strategist at Meridian Logistics to the carefully maintained balance of his personal life or so he thought. He glanced at his watch. 7:30 p.m. Anna was late. Again, the third time this week. The knife came down on the cutting board with increased force as Jesse sliced through a bell pepper. Their marriage had once been the envy of their affluent Asheville neighborhood, the brilliant strategist and his gorgeous, charismatic wife. But lately, something had shifted. The subtle glances that once passed between them had dried up, replaced by tense silences and clipped conversations. The sound of tires on wet gravel pulled Jesse from his thoughts. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall as Anna's Audi pulled into the driveway. He continued chopping, keeping his movements even and controlled despite the knot tightening in his stomach. The front door opened, bringing with it the scent of rain and expensive perfume. Tom Ford's Black Orchid, not the Chanel he'd given her for their anniversary 3 months ago. Anna hadn't worn that once. "You're cooking." It wasn't a question, but an observation, tinged with something like disappointment. Jesse didn't turn around. "I thought we could eat in tonight." Anna moved into his peripheral vision, setting her designer bag on the counter. Her blonde hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, makeup still perfect despite the rain. She wore a dress he didn't recognize, tailored, expensive, new. "I already ate with the team. Big presentation tomorrow." She scrolled through her phone, not looking at him. Hank wanted all hands on deck. Hank. The name appeared in their conversations with increasing frequency. Hank Vance, CEO of Next Tech Solutions, where Anna had been working as director of marketing for the past year. Hank with his Maserati and his vacation home in Aspen. Hank with his TED Talks and magazine covers. "You could have called," Jesse said, his voice level, betraying none of the irritation simmering beneath. Anna finally looked up from her phone, her blue eyes sharp. "Would it have made a difference? You'd still be here, chopping vegetables with military precision like everything else in your life." The knife paused mid-cut. Jesse absorbed the blow without flinching. This was new, the open contempt, the dismissal of who he was. He set the knife down carefully and turned to face her. "What does that mean?" Anna gave a short laugh, devoid of warmth. "Nothing. Everything." She waved a hand dismissively. "I'm going to take a shower." As she turned to leave, Jesse noticed a small gift bag tucked partially into her purse, mint green with silver tissue paper peeking out. The logo belonged to Asheville's most exclusive jeweler. "Did you buy yourself something?" he asked, nodding toward the bag. Anna stiffened almost imperceptibly before shrugging. "Just a bracelet. Reward for landing the Peterson account." Jesse watched her walk away, the click of her shoes on hardwood fading as she ascended the stairs. He returned to his chopping, but the rhythm was broken. His mind calculated possibilities, probabilities, patterns the way it did at work when analyzing supply chains and logistical weaknesses. Something was very wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, the evidence mounted. Late nights at the office. New clothes. The constant ping of text messages that Anna would answer with a slight smile before putting her phone face down. Weekend work emergencies that left Jesse alone in their 5-bedroom house. The silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Jesse observed it all with a detached analysis that had earned him his reputation as a strategic mastermind. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Information was power, and Jesse Hale never entered a battle unprepared. And on a Wednesday evening, Jesse arrived home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but Anna's car was in the driveway. He moved silently through the foyer, hearing soft music coming from the living room. He paused at the entrance, taking in the scene before him. Anna sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by gift boxes, wrapping paper, and ribbons. She was carefully wrapping what appeared to be an expensive watch, her movements delicate and focused in a way they never were when she wrapped presents for him or their family members. Next to her lay several already wrapped packages. A rectangular box that looked like it might contain a tie or scarf, a small square box that typically held cufflinks, and a larger box with the logo of an exclusive men's cologne brand partially visible beneath the wrapping. Jessie leaned against the doorframe. Planning ahead for Christmas? Anna jumped, her hand going to her chest. Jesus, Jessie, make some noise when you walk. Sorry, he said, not meaning it. Those look nice. Who are they for? Anna's face closed off, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation. The executive team. End of quarter gifts. Jessie nodded slowly, eyes lingering on the watch box. That's generous. Company footing the bill. Of course. She began gathering the gifts, stacking them with unnecessary force. What are you doing home so early? Meeting finished ahead of schedule. Jessie stepped into the room, picking up one of the wrapped boxes heavier than he expected. This cologne is nice. Which one is it? Anna snatched the package from his hand. You wouldn't understand. You never do. The words hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Jessie studied his wife's face, the defensive set of her jaw, the flash of guilt quickly masked by defiance. He had interrogated corporate spies and dishonest business partners, read the micro-expressions that gave away their lies. Anna's tells were as clear to him as neon signs. I understand more than you think, he said quietly. Fear flickered across Anna's face before she recovered, shoving the gifts into a shopping bag. I need to take these to the office. Don't wait up. Jessie watched her hurry from the room, listened to her grab her keys and purse, heard the front door slam with unnecessary force. Through the window, he observed her placing the bag carefully in her trunk before speeding away down their tree-lined street. He stood motionless in the living room, surrounded by discarded scraps of wrapping paper and ribbon. There was a cold, hollow feeling spreading through his chest, not quite pain, not quite anger. Something colder, something calculated, was taking root. Jessie walked to his home office and sat down at his computer. He began making notes, creating a timeline of Anna's changing behavior over the past months. Dates, times, discrepancies in her stories. The strategic mind that had earned him millions now turned toward a different kind of analysis, that if there was a battle coming, Jessie would be ready. 3 days later, Jessie sat at their dining room table, watching the steam rise from a plate of untouched salmon. Across from him, Anna picked at her food, her attention focused on her phone as it buzzed with incoming messages beside her plate. The tension between them had crystallized into something solid, like ice forming over a lake. They moved around each other with careful precision, speaking only when necessary. Their conversations reduced to logistics and schedules. Jessie took a sip of his wine, a Pinot Noir that Anna once claimed was her favorite. She hadn't touched hers. How's the Peterson account? He asked, breaking the oppressive silence. Anna glanced up, seemingly surprised he'd initiated conversation. Fine. On track. And Hank, how's he handling the merger rumors? The slight stiffening of her shoulders told him everything. What rumors? It's all over the industry blogs. Nextech being courted by Astra Global. Stock jumped 8% today. Jessie cut a piece of salmon with deliberate care. I assumed he'd have mentioned it. And his knuckles whitened around her fork. He doesn't discuss everything with the marketing department. No, I suppose not. Jessie set down his knife and looked directly at her. What does he discuss with you, Anna? The question landed like a stone in still water. Anna's eyes met his, wide and then narrowing with calculation. What are you asking me, Jessie? I think you know. Anna set down her silverware with a clatter. If you have something to say, just say it. Jessie leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face, the face he'd woken up to for 7 years, now somehow belonging to a stranger. The gifts weren't for the executive team, he said simply. The cologne is Clive Christian. Hank wore it at the charity gala last month. The watch matches the style he favors. And you've been transferring money from our joint account to your personal $120,000 over the last 2 months. Anna's face flushed, then paled. For a moment, Jessie thought she might deny it, might fabricate some elaborate explanation. Instead, she laughed a hollow, brittle sound that echoed in the cavernous dining room. You, in your strategies, she said, shaking her head. Always analyzing, always 3 steps ahead. Did you make a spreadsheet about our marriage too? Plot on a graph showing diminishing returns. And I know. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I'm done pretending. You want the truth? Fine. Jesse remained seated, his expression impassive despite the ice spreading through his veins. I'm leaving you, Jesse. I found someone better, Hank Vance. He's powerful. He makes me feel alive. Her voice hardened as she delivered the final blow. You're just pathetic. The word hung in the air between them. Jesse didn't flinch, didn't blink. His face remained a perfect mask of composure, revealing nothing of the cold fury building inside him. How long? He asked, his voice steady. Anna paced to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn that stretched toward the tree line. 3 months. But I've wanted out for longer. What changed? She turned back to him, her expression a mixture of contempt and pity that made his stomach turn. You want to analyze this too? Fine. You're predictable, Jesse. Safe. Your idea of spontaneity is ordering a different wine with dinner. She gestured around at their tastefully decorated home. All of this, it's suffocating me. Hank understands ambition. He's going places. And the money? Jesse asked, still unervingly calm. Anna shrugged, a gesture so casual it sent a spike of rage through him. Security. Plus, I've earned it, putting up with your emotional unavailability for years. Jesse folded his napkin and placed it beside his plate. I see. His composure seemed to infuriate her. That's it. I see. God, even now, you can't show a real emotion. This is exactly why I'm leaving. What response would satisfy you, Anna? Should I beg? Throw things? Threaten you? Jesse stood slowly. Would that convince you to stay? For a fleeting moment, uncertainty crossed Anna's face. Then her expression hardened. Nothing would make me stay. I've already found an apartment. Hank is having my things moved tomorrow while you're at work. Jesse nodded once. Efficient. Anna grabbed her phone and purse. I'm staying at the Grand Bohemian tonight. I'll be back tomorrow at 2 to oversee the movers. She paused at the dining room doorway. The papers will be delivered to your office next week. Jesse watched her walk away, listened to her heels against the marble foyer, heard the front door open and close. Through the window, he observed her slide into her Audi and drive away. Without a backward glance, he remained standing at the table, perfectly still, for 5 full minutes. Then, with methodical precision, he began clearing the dishes, scraping uneaten food into the garbage, loading the dishwasher. His movements were automatic, his mind elsewhere calculating, processing, planning. Later that night, Jesse sat in his home office, the room illuminated only by the blue glow of his computer screen. He pulled up their joint bank accounts. As Anna had said, she'd been making regular transfers to her personal account. Now, the main account had been emptied entirely, leaving only $128.67 where there had once been over $200,000. He switched screens to their investment portfolio. Still intact. Anna either hadn't gotten to it yet, or didn't have the passwords. Jesse began making transfers, securing assets, protecting what he could. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Sophie. Everything okay? Just got a weird message from Anna about helping her move stuff tomorrow. Jesse stared at the message, considering his response. Sophie had never liked Anna, had seen through her charm to the selfishness beneath. He defended Anna countless times over the years, maintaining family peace. No more? Jesse, Anna's leaving me. For her boss. Don't help her. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Sophie. What the actual FUCK? I'm coming over. Jesse. No need. I'm fine, Sophie. Bullshit. Be there in 20. With bourbon. Jesse set down his phone. Sophie would understand his need for space, but she'd come anyway. That was who she was. Fiercely protective, unwilling to take no for an answer when family was hurting. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. No tears came. No overwhelming emotion. Just a cold, clear focus sharpening within him. Anna thought she knew him, thought she understood the limits of what he was capable of. She was wronged by the time Sophie arrived, banging on the front door hard enough to wake the neighbors. Jesse had formulated the beginnings of a plan. "Where is she?" "I'll kill her myself," Sophie announced as she blew past him into the foyer, a bottle of expensive bourbon in one hand and an overnight bag in the other. At 35, Sophie Marrow was a force of nature, 5'4" of pure determination, with the same dark eyes as Jesse, but none of his reserve. "She's gone, staying at the Grand Bohemian." Jesse closed the door behind her. "And you won't kill her. Watch me." Sophie slammed the bourbon down on the entryway table. "Her boss? Seriously? That slimy tech bro with the fake tan? I knew she was shallow, but Jesus Christ." Jesse led the way to the kitchen, retrieving 2 glasses from the cabinet. "You never liked her, and you always defended her." Sophie followed, kicking off her boots and perching on a bar stool. "Tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail." Jesse poured them each 3 fingers of bourbon and recounted the evening's events in the same measured tone he'd used to describe a business setback. Sophie listened, her expression darkening with each new detail, interjecting occasional profanities that would have made their conservative mother faint. "The money's gone?" she asked when he finished. "From a joint account, yes. I've secured the investments and my personal accounts." Sophie knocked back her bourbon in one swallow. "Good. But that's still theft. It's a joint account. Legally, she had every right." Jesse sipped his drink, the burn barely registering. "The investments are the real assets anyway. I don't care about the legal technicalities. She's been planning this, Jesse. Stockpiling cash, buying gifts for this asshole with your money." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "What are you going to do?" "Do? Yes, do. You're not just going to let her walk away with half your net worth and your dignity, are you?" She leaned forward, studying his face. "I know that look. You're plotting something." Jesse gave a minimal shrug. "I'm processing." "Bullshit. You don't process, you strategize." Sophie poured herself another drink. "Whatever you're planning, I want in. There's nothing to be in on. Anna made her choice. She'll get what's coming to her." Sophie fell silent, watching him with the perceptiveness that had always allowed her to see through his careful composure. Finally, she nodded slowly. "You're not heartbroken?" It wasn't a question, but Jesse answered anyway. "No." Angry, he considered this. "Yes, but not in the way she'd want." Sophie smiled, then a sharp, knowing smile that matched his own capacity for cold calculation. "Good. She wants dramatics. Tears and begging or rage and violence. She's built her whole exit strategy around you falling apart or lashing out." "I know. So don't give her the satisfaction." Sophie raised her glass in a mock toast. "Let her think she's won. For now." Jesse clinked his glass against hers. For now, they drank in companionable silence, the bond between them stronger than words. Sophie had always understood him in ways Anna never could or never tried to. She recognized the strategic mind that others mistook for emotional distance. "I'm staying tonight," she announced. Non-negotiable. Jesse didn't argue. The house would be too empty, too full of Anna's lingering presence. Guest rooms made up. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jesse stood in the master bedroom, looking at the space Anna had occupied. Her closet door hung open, revealing designer clothes she'd be coming back for tomorrow. Her vanity was cluttered with expensive cosmetics and perfumes. The bathroom counter held her creams and lotions, all symbols of a life that had been a careful illusion. Jesse opened his laptop and began researching real estate listings. By morning, he'd have an offer in on a downtown condo, modern, minimalist, nothing like this house that Anna had decorated to impress their wealthy neighbors. He'd sell this place, with its too many bedrooms and magazine-perfect furnishings. It was time to burn it all down and start fresh. Or perhaps, he thought as a plan began to crystallize in his mind. Burn wasn't quite the right word. Freeze. Calculate. Destroy. That was more his style. 5 days had passed since Anna's departure, and Jesse had spoken to no one except Sophie and his lawyer. He'd taken a week of personal leave from Meridian Logistics, citing family matters. His boss, recognizing the uncharacteristic request from his most dedicated strategist, had approved it without question. The movers had come, as Anna said they would. Jesse hadn't been there to witness it, having left the house before they arrived. He'd given Sophie a key and asked her to observe from a distance, to ensure nothing was taken that didn't belong to Anna. According to Sophie's report, Anna had supervised the entire process, directing the movers with military precision while checking her phone constantly. She looked disappointed that you weren't there, Sophie had told him over the phone. Kept glancing at the door like she expected you to burst in and make a scene. Jesse had merely hummed in acknowledgement. He'd been at his lawyer's office, discussing options and preparing for the inevitable divorce proceedings. The house was now on the market, listed at slightly below value to ensure a quick sale. The condo downtown was under contract, with closing scheduled for the following week. Now, Jesse sat in his nearly empty living room, surrounded by the ghostly outlines where Anna's chosen furniture had once stood. She'd taken most of it, leaving behind only his desk, their bed, which he'd already arranged to have removed, and some kitchen essentials. The stripped-down space felt appropriate, a physical manifestation of the hollowed-out shell his marriage had become. His phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Congratulations," in garish all caps. The real estate agent had already received multiple offers on the house, all above asking price. Despite the competitive price point, Jesse closed the email without responding. He'd deal with it tomorrow. Tonight, he wanted silence. Time to think, to finalize the strategy that had been forming in his mind since the night Anna left. The neighborhood was quiet at this late hour, just past 11 p.m. Through the large windows, Jesse could see the dark outlines of trees against the night sky, the distant glow of lights from other houses set back from the road. This exclusive enclave outside Asheville cultivated a specific image: old money discretion mixed with new money luxury. Reputations here were currency, carefully maintained through charity galas and dinner parties where gossip was traded like stock tips. Anna had reveled in their social standing. She'd worked tirelessly to cultivate the right connections, to be invited to the right events. Now, Jesse wondered how long it would take for her absence to be noticed, for questions to be asked. Not long, he suspected. Already, his phone had accumulated several unanswered texts from neighbors and acquaintances' casual inquiries about missed tennis matches and canceled dinner plans that thinly veiled their curiosity. A sharp knock at the front door pulled Jesse from his thoughts. He glanced at his watch. 11:22 p.m., far too late for casual visitors. Another knock came, more insistent this time. Jesse moved silently to the entryway, peering through the peephole. Miles Turner stood on the porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. The 50-something accountant lived in the house across the street, a friendly but nosy neighbor who seemed to make it his business to know everyone else's. With reluctance, Jesse opened the door. "Miles, it's late." "Jesse." Miles's round face was flushed, his eyes wide with concern. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's something I thought you should know." He broke off, glancing over his shoulder toward the street. "What is it?" Jesse asked, his patience thinning. Miles lowered his voice conspiratorially. "It's Anna. She's at your door, screaming for help. Something's wrong." Jesse's expression didn't change, but his mind raced through possibilities. "My door? I'm standing at my door." No, your old door. The side door to the garage at your old house, where you lived before moving here." Miles wrung his hands. "I was driving home from my sister's place and took the back way. I saw her car parked hastily at the curb, and then I saw her. She looked terrible, Jesse, crying, pounding on the door like her life depended on it." A cold satisfaction settled in Jesse's chest. So it had begun already, sooner than he'd expected, but perfectly in line with his predictions about Anna's relationship with Hank Vance. "Did you speak to her?" Jesse asked, keeping his voice level. "I tried. I pulled over and called out, but she either didn't hear me or ignored me. She just kept screaming your name, begging you to let her in. I thought you should know. Maybe she doesn't realize you've moved." Miles's expression was pained with genuine concern. "Should we call someone?" "The police." Jesse leaned against the doorframe, considering his response. Miles Turner was the perfect witness, well-meaning, respected in the community, with no reason to lie about what he'd seen. "No police," Jesse said firmly. "But thank you for letting me know. I'll handle it. Are you going over there? Should I come with you?" Miles offered, eager to be involved in the drama. That won't be necessary. Jesse stepped back, preparing to close the door. I appreciate your concern, Miles, but this is between Anna and me. Miles looked disappointed, but nodded reluctantly. Of course. Just trying to be a good neighbor. If you need anything, I'll let you know. Jesse finished for him, already closing the door. Good night, Miles. Once alone, Jesse moved to the window overlooking the street. He watched Miles walk back to his car, casting glances over his shoulder at Jesse's house before driving away. Perfect. By tomorrow, Miles would have told his wife, who would tell her book club, who would spread the story throughout their social circle. Anna Hale, who had left her husband for a powerful boss, was now back at their old home, desperate and distraught. The implications would be clear to everyone in their gossip-hungry community. Jesse checked his phone. No calls or texts from Anna yet. He walked to his office and sat down at his computer, pulling up the security app connected to his old house. He'd maintained the system despite moving out, knowing it might prove useful. The exterior camera showed exactly what Miles had described. Anna's Audi was parked haphazardly at the curb, one wheel on the grass. Anna herself was at the side door, her appearance a far cry from her usual polished perfection. Her hair hung loose and tangled. Her makeup was smeared by tears, and her clothes' expensive silk blouse and tailored pants were rumpled as if she'd been wearing them for days. Jesse turned up the volume. Anna's voice came through the speakers, raw with desperation. Jesse, I know you're in there. Please open the door. She pounded with both fists, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Please just let me explain. He watched dispassionately as she sank to her knees on the doorstep, sobbing uncontrollably now. Please, Jesse. He's crazy. You were right about him. I can't go back there. 4 or 5 solid minutes. Jesse observed her breakdown without reaction. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Sophie. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. What's happened? Anna's at the old house, Jesse said calmly, making quite a scene, according to Miles Turner, who was kind enough to inform me. What? Sophie's confusion was evident. Why would she go there? You moved out days ago. She doesn't know that. I didn't tell her I was selling the house. Oh, a pause as Sophie processed this. So she's there thinking you're inside, ignoring her. Exactly. That's cold, Jesse. There was no disapproval in Sophie's voice, only a faint note of admiration. What happened with Hank? Exactly what I predicted. He showed his true colors once he had her. Men like Hank Vance don't value what comes easily. Jesse continued watching the monitor as Anna's sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths. The honeymoon phase lasted approximately 5 days. Right on schedule. Sophie whistled low. You calculated even that. Remind me never to cross you. I didn't calculate it. I observed patterns. Jesse watched as Anna finally gave up, stumbling back to her car. Hank has a history. 3 marriages, numerous affairs, all following the same trajectory. Love bombing followed by control, followed by emotional abuse when the newness wears off. And Anna walked right into it. Sophie's tone hardened. Can't say I feel sorry for her. Neither do I. On the screen, Anna sat in her car, head resting against the steering wheel. After several minutes, she straightened, checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, and wiped at her ruined makeup. Then she started the engine and drove away, her tires leaving marks on the pristine lawn. She's gone, Jesse reported. Where will she go? Sophie asked. Not back to Hank, not tonight. Jesse closed the security app. Most likely a hotel. She'll lick her wounds, try to salvage her pride, and pretend none of this happened. Until it happens again. Yes. Jesse's certainty was absolute. And it will be worse next time. There was a long silence on the line before Sophie spoke again. What are you planning, Jesse? I'm not planning anything. I'm simply letting events unfold naturally. Bullshit. You don't leave anything to chance. Jesse smiled slightly, though there was no warmth in it. Let's just say I'm creating an environment where certain outcomes become inevitable. That's cryptic even for you. Sophie sighed. Will you at least tell me if I need to establish an alibi for any particular date? That won't be necessary. Everything I do will be perfectly legal. Legal doesn't mean ethical, Sophie pointed out. Ethics are subjective. Anna made her choice. Jesse's voice dropped to a near whisper. Now she can live with the consequences. After ending the call with Sophie, Jesse sat alone in the darkened house, contemplating his next moves. Anna's appearance at their old home was an unexpected acceleration of his timeline, but adaptability was key to any successful strategy. He pulled out a notebook and began writing, mapping out possibilities and contingencies. The plan forming in his mind wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. It wasn't even about revenge in the traditional sense that it was about justice. Cold, calculated, and complete by the time dawn broke over the mountains, casting long shadows across the empty rooms of the house Anna had abandoned. Jesse had refined his strategy to clinical precision. He would not rush. He would not act out of emotion. He would move with the patient certainty of a man playing chess against an opponent who didn't know the game had begun. Anna thought she had delivered the killing blow that night at dinner. She thought her cruel words, "You're just pathetic," had been the end of their story. She was wrong that it was merely the beginning. The morning sunlight filtered through the half-empty condo, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floors. Jesse stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at downtown Asheville. 3 weeks had passed since Anna's desperate appearance at their old house. 3 weeks of strategic silence. The sale of their suburban home had closed yesterday, 2 weeks faster than the standard timeline, thanks to an all-cash offer from a tech executive relocating from California. The contents Jesse hadn't taken to the condo had been donated or sold. Every trace of his life with Anna systematically erased. His phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Anna's name flashed on the screen for the 4th call this week. Jesse watched it ring until the screen went dark again. No voicemails, no texts, just the calls growing more frequent as the days passed. The phone rang again almost immediately. This time, Sophie's name appeared. "You're not answering her calls," Sophie said without preamble when he picked up. "No, good." There was satisfaction in his sister's voice. "She showed up at my office yesterday." Jesse moved away from the window, suddenly alert. "What did she want?" "To find you, obviously." "Said she's been trying to reach you for weeks." "Said it's urgent." Sophie snorted. She looked terrible trying to hide it under expensive makeup, but I could tell she hadn't been sleeping. "What did you tell her?" "That you were unavailable. Permanently." Sophie's voice hardened. She had the nerve to ask if you were seeing someone new already. "I told her your personal life was no longer any of her business." Jesse nodded, though Sophie couldn't see him. In her reaction, she actually teared up. Sophie's tone was incredulous. Started saying how she'd made a horrible mistake, how Hank wasn't who she thought he was. I cut her off before she could really get going. "That was considerate of you." "I wasn't being considerate. I was being strategic," Sophie replied. The more desperate she gets, the more public her desperation becomes, the more it works in your favor. Jesse smiled slightly. His sister understood the game perhaps better than anyone. "Have you heard any specifics about her situation with Hank?" "Just rumors. Meredith Brown saw them arguing at Sovereign Remedies last week. Said it got heated enough that the manager had to intervene." Sophie paused, and Taylor mentioned seeing Anna alone at Blue Spiral Gallery, crying in the bathroom. When she asked what was wrong, Anna just mumbled something about terrible choices and ran out. "Interesting." Jesse opened his laptop, making notes in a document titled Progression. "Anything else?" "Just that she's been asking about you all over town. Very publicly, very emotionally." Sophie sounded almost impressed. If her goal is to destroy her own reputation in our social circles, she's succeeding brilliantly. That's not her goal. She wants sympathy, forgiveness. Jesse's voice remained perfectly level. She wants a safety net for when Hank inevitably discards her, which you have no intention of providing. None whatsoever. There was a moment of silence before Sophie spoke again, her tone more serious. "I saw the listing for your old house pop up as sold. You didn't tell me. It wasn't relevant. Cutting all ties with your past life is pretty relevant, Jesse." She sighed. "I'm coming over tonight. We need to talk face to face. I have plans. Cancel them." Jesse checked his watch. "Fine. 7 o'clock. I'll bring dinner from that Thai place you like." Sophie's tone softened slightly. And Jesse? Whatever you're planning, just make sure you're thinking clearly. I'm always thinking clearly. That's the problem Anna never understood. After ending the call, Jesse returned to the window. Downtown Asheville bustled below, tourists mingling with locals, the Art Deco buildings catching the late morning light. From here, he could see the spire of the Grand Bohemian Hotel, where Anna had spent her first night away from him. The night she thought she was moving up in the world. His phone rang again. Anna once more. This time, Jesse picked up but remained silent. Jesse. Anna's voice was tentative, hopeful. Jesse, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. He said nothing, letting the silence stretch between them. I know you're there. I can hear you breathing. Her voice cracked slightly. Please just... I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Hank isn't who I thought he was. Jesse still said nothing, but he didn't end the call. Can we meet? Just to talk? I'll come anywhere, anytime. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable now. I've left him. I'm at the Marriott on Tunnel Road. Room 312. Please, Jesse. Finally, he spoke, his voice cool and detached. Why? The single word seemed to catch her off guard. What? Why should we meet? What purpose would it serve? Because we need to discuss things. The divorce papers? I don't want to sign them. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I want to come home. You don't have a home with me anymore, Anna. Jesse's tone remained conversational, as if discussing a mildly interesting business proposal. You made your choice. You calculated the odds and decided Hank Vance offered better returns than I did. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Jesse watched a red-tailed hawk circle above the city. You weighed your options and chose. Now you're experiencing buyer's remorse because the product didn't meet your expectations. That's not fair. Anna's voice hardened slightly. You make it sound so cold, wasn't it? The line went quiet for a moment. I miss you, she said finally. No, you don't. You miss the stability I provided. You miss knowing where you stood. You miss the life we built. Jesse's voice remained calm, analytical. But you never missed me, Anna. Not the real me. That's not true. Her voice caught on a sob. I love you. You love what I could give you. There's a difference. Jesse moved away from the window, his decision made. I won't be meeting with you. Any communication can go through our lawyers. Jesse, please, goodbye, Anna. He ended the call and blocked her number in one smooth motion. The strategic phase of silence was complete. Now it was time for action. Jesse returned his laptop and opened a new document. At the top, he typed, Phase 2, Deconstruction. Beneath it, he created a bulleted list of objectives, endpoints, and collateral damage considerations. That'd be why the time Sophie arrived at 7. He had mapped out the next 3 months with military precision. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. No direct attacks, no visible fingerprints. Just the careful positioning of pieces on a board, allowing gravity to take its natural course. Sophie entered the condo without knocking, a bag of fragrant Thai food in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. She surveyed the minimalist space with approval. This suits you, she said, setting the food on the kitchen counter. Clean lines, no clutter, no fussy decorative pillows that serve no actual purpose. Jesse took the wine and opened it, pouring 2 glasses. Anna would hate it, exactly why it's perfect. Sophie unpacked containers of pad thai and green curry. So, let's talk about your master plan for destruction. Jesse raised an eyebrow. What makes you think I have one? Sophie fixed him with an incredulous stare. Because I know you. You don't just absorb humiliation and betrayal. You calculate an appropriate response. Perhaps I've decided to take the high road. Move on. Live well. Sophie laughed, the sound sharp and knowing. The high road for most people, sure. But your version of living well includes making sure those who wronged you face consequences. Jesse didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a glass of wine and led her to the living area, where a sleek coffee table held his open laptop. Sophie glanced at the screen, her eyes widening slightly as she read the detailed strategy document. Jesus, Jesse. She looked up at him. This is thorough, terrifying. She sat down on the sofa, still staring at the screen. You're not thinking about forgiving her, are you? No, Jesse replied, his voice like steel. I'm going to bury her. Sophie nodded slowly, taking a sip of her wine. Tell me how. For the next hour, Jesse outlined his strategy. He explained how Anna's social standing, the thing she valued above almost all else, would be systematically dismantled. How Hank Vance, the powerful CEO she'd chosen over him, would be exposed as the fraud he was. How every card in their carefully constructed house would be pulled away until there was nothing left but ruins. The beauty of it, Jesse explained, is that I won't have to do anything directly. Just create the right conditions and let human nature take its course. Sophie listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions or suggesting refinements. When he finished, she leaned back, studying him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've thought of everything," she said finally. "But what about you? What happens to Jesse Hale while all this unfolds?" "I'll be fine." "That's not what I asked." Sophie set down her wine glass. "You're pouring all this mental energy into destroying Anna and Hank. What are you building for yourself?" Jesse hadn't expected the question. "That's not relevant to the current objective." "It's the only relevant thing," Sophie insisted. "Revenge is a hollow victory if you're left with nothing but ashes." "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking justice. Call it whatever you want." Sophie leaned forward, her expression intense. "But promise me you won't lose yourself in this. Anna already took too much from you. Don't give her the satisfaction of taking your future too." Jesse considered his sister's words. In all his planning, he hadn't factored in his own trajectory beyond the completion of his strategy. An oversight that, in business, he would never have permitted. "You're right," he conceded finally. "I'll adjust the plan." "Good." Sophie seemed satisfied. "Now eat your pad thai before it gets cold, and tell me what I can do to help." "I need information," Jesse said, picking up his food. "About Greta Vaughn." Sophie frowned. "Hank's ex-wife?" "The gallery owner." "The same." Jesse took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "She's a potential ally, but I need to understand her motivations before making contact. I know her casually through the Arts Council. Smart woman, tough as nails." Sophie twirled noodles around her fork. "They divorced, 3 years ago? It wasn't pretty for what I heard. He cheated, then tried to strong-arm her in the settlement," Jesse confirmed. "But she outsmarted him, walked away with more than he expected to give. So she already has reason to dislike him." Sophie nodded. "But will she risk her own reputation to help take him down?" "That depends on what she values," Jesse replied. "Find out what matters most to Greta Vaughn. Everyone has a pressure point. I'll see what I can learn." Sophie studied him over a glass. "And what about Anna's pressure point? Besides social status?" "Pride," Jesse said without hesitation. "She needs to be the one who left, the one who traded up. Being abandoned by Hank after leaving me would destroy her self-image. And you think that's inevitable? It's already happening. The arguments in public, her desperate attempts to contact me." Jesse's expression hardened. Anna made a fundamental miscalculation about Hank Vance. He doesn't value loyalty or authenticity. He values novelty and conquest. So she's already old news to him, Sophie concluded. "Precisely. And once the whispers start about her being nothing more than Hank's latest disposable affair." Jesse left the sentence hanging. Sophie nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That's where phase 2 begins, isn't it? The whispers." "Yes." Jesse closed his laptop. "And you and I will not be the source of any of them. We'll simply create an environment where certain conclusions become inevitable." "Strategic positioning," Sophie murmured. "Always your specialty." They finished their meal, discussing more mundane matters. Sophie's latest legal case, Jesse's plans for consulting work now that he'd taken an extended leave from Meridian. Neither mentioned Anna again directly, but her presence lingered in the spaces between their words, a ghost to be exorcised through careful planning rather than emotional outbursts. After Sophie left, Jesse stood again at the window, watching the city lights come alive as darkness fell. Phase 2 would begin tomorrow, subtle, undetectable moves that would set larger forces in motion. The destruction of Anna and Hank would appear organic, self-inflicted. None of it would trace back to him. Justice, cold and calculated, was finally at hand. Jesse entered the sleek glass offices of Brennan and Associates with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. The boutique PR firm occupied the 12th floor of Asheville's most prestigious office building, its reception area decorated in chrome and leather with abstract art that probably cost more than most cars. "Jessie Hale for Diane Brennan," he told the receptionist, a polished young woman who looked like she'd stepped from the pages of a fashion magazine. "I believe she's expecting me." "Of course, Mr. Hale. She's ready for you." The woman stood, gesturing toward a hallway of glass-walled offices. "This way, please." Diane Brennan's corner office offered panoramic views of the mountains beyond Asheville. The woman herself rose from behind a massive desk as Jesse entered, tall, impeccably tailored, with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd built a career on understanding how information flowed. "Jesse," she greeted him with a firm handshake. "It's been too long. Though I must say, I was surprised to get your call. Thank you for making time, Diane." Jesse took the offered seat across from her desk. "I value your discretion. Discretion is what I sell." She sat back down, studying him with open curiosity. "Now, what can Brennan and Associates do for you that your corporate PR team at Meridian can't handle?" "This is personal, not professional." Jesse met her gaze directly. "I'm sure you've heard about my situation." Diane nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Asheville is a small town in many ways, despite its growth." "Yes, I've heard rumors about you and Anna." "Then you know she left me for Hank Vance." "I had heard that, yes." Diane folded her hands on her desk. "And while I sympathize, Jesse, I'm not entirely sure how my firm can help with marital issues. I'm not looking for reconciliation." Jesse's voice remained perfectly level. "I'm looking for truth to prevail." "Truth?" Diane raised an eyebrow. "In my experience, truth in these situations is rarely simple. In this case, it is." Jesse reached into his briefcase and removed a slim folder, placing on the desk between them. "Hank Vance is not who he presents himself to be. His reputation as a brilliant tech innovator is built on smoke and mirrors. Nextech's flagship product was developed by a team he later forced out. Their financial reports show concerning patterns. And his treatment of women, including my wife, follows a documented cycle of conquest, control, and discard." Diane didn't touch the folder. "And you're sharing this with me because you represent 3 clients who are considering major investments in Nextech. Because your sister sits on the board of the Asheville Tech Initiative, which recently named Vance their Innovator of the Year." Jesse leaned forward slightly. "And because you've built your reputation on protecting your clients from exactly the kind of PR disaster that association with Vance will soon become." Diane's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Interest, calculation. "That sounds almost like a threat, Jesse." "Not at all. It's a courtesy." He gestured to the folder. "Everything in there is factual, documented, and will eventually become public knowledge. I'm simply giving you advance notice so you can advise your clients appropriately." "And what do you get out of this advance notice?" "Nothing, except perhaps the satisfaction of knowing that those who deserve consequences receive them." Diane finally reached for the folder, opening it and scanning the first page. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she flipped through the documents. "This is comprehensive," she admitted. "But why not take it to the press yourself? Or the SEC, given some of these financial irregularities?" "I have no interest in being associated with Vance's downfall." Jesse stood, straightening his suit jacket. "What happens to that information is entirely your decision. Use it. Ignore it, that's your prerogative. I've simply fulfilled what I saw as a professional obligation to someone I respect." Diane closed the folder, tapping her manicured fingernails against it thoughtfully. "And Anna? What happens to her in this scenario?" "Anna made her choice." Jesse's voice held no emotion. "She tied her fate to Vance's. Whatever follows is the natural consequence of that decision." Cold but logical. Diane stood as well. "I'll review this information carefully. And I appreciate the professional courtesy. That's all I ask." Jesse extended his hand. "Thank you for your time, Diane." As he left the building and walked toward his car, Jesse checked his watch. The meeting had taken exactly 27 minutes, precisely as he'd calculated. Phase 2 was now in motion. Diane Brennan was not a woman who sat on potentially damaging information. She would make calls, ask questions, set wheels turning, all without Jesse's name ever entering the conversation. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Meeting with Greta set for tomorrow. Wine bar on Battery Park Avenue, 3 p.m. She was intrigued by the invitation. Jesse texted back, "Perfect. Keep it casual." Information gathering only at this stage. The next piece was moving into position. That evening, Jesse visited the Crow's Nest, an upscale bar frequented by Asheville's business elite. He hadn't been there since before Anna left. It had been one of her favorite places to see and be seen. Arriving alone was a calculated risk, but a necessary one for this phase of the plan. He had barely settled at the bar with his whiskey when a familiar voice spoke from beside him. Jesse Hale, man of mystery these days. He turned to find Meredith Brown, president of the Asheville Business Council and one of the most connected people in their social circle. She slid onto the stool next to him, signaling the bartender for a martini. "Meredith," he acknowledged with a nod. "How are you?" "Better than you, from what I hear." She studied him with undisguised curiosity. "Though you're looking remarkably composed for a man whose wife ran off with another man." "Life continues," Jesse said simply. "Indeed it does." She accepted her martini from the bartender with a smile. "Everyone's been wondering where you've been hiding." "Sold a house, new condo downtown, extended leave from Meridian, quite the life overhaul. Sometimes a clean slate is necessary." Meredith nodded sympathetically. "And Anna? Have you spoken with her?" This was at the opening he'd anticipated. Jesse took a deliberate sip of his whiskey before answering. "I have not. I believe she's made her situation with Hank quite clear." He kept his tone neutral, factual, though from what I understand, the reality hasn't matched her expectations. Meredith leaned in slightly, her eyes brightening with interest. "Oh, do tell." Jesse gave a small shrug. "It's not my place to discuss Anna's choices. I'm sure she had her reasons for approaching Sophie at her office, or for the incident at our old house." Incident? Meredith was practically vibrating with curiosity now. "I'd rather not go into details," Jesse said, projecting reluctance. "It's unfortunate, but these situations rarely end well when they begin with deception." "That's certainly true." Meredith sipped her martini thoughtfully. "Though between us, I'm not surprised. Hank Vance has quite the reputation. Did you know he went through 3 executive assistants last year alone? All young, attractive women who left without explanation." "I wasn't aware," Jesse replied, though of course he had been. That information was on page 7 of the dossier he'd given Diane Brennan. And now this sudden merger talk with Astra Global. Meredith shook her head. "Word is, Nextech isn't as solid financially as Vance pretends. The merger is more of a bailout." "Interesting." Jesse filed this information away. It was developing even faster than he'd predicted. Business can be unpredictable, as can relationships. Meredith gave him a knowing look. "I saw them arguing at Sovereign Remedies last week. It got quite heated, Anna in tears, Hank grabbing her arm. The manager had to intervene." "I'm sorry to hear that," Jesse said, his expression conveying just the right amount of concern without revealing satisfaction. "Anna deserves better." "Does she, though?" Meredith raised an eyebrow. "After what she did to you, most people in town think she got exactly what she deserved, trading a good man for a flashy fraud." Jesse allowed a slight frown to crease his brow. "I wouldn't wish unhappiness on anyone, regardless of past actions." "You're a better person than most, then." Meredith patted his arm. "And certainly better than she deserves." The conversation shifted to business matters, neighborhood gossip, the upcoming charity gala season. Jesse participated with just enough engagement to seem normal while revealing nothing substantive. By the time he finished his second whiskey, he'd planted 3 subtle seeds about Anna's increasingly desperate attempts to contact him, all framed as reluctant admissions from a concerned ex-husband. Meredith would spread them through their social circle by lunchtime tomorrow, each retelling, amplifying the details until Anna's reputation for calculated social climbing would transform into one of pathetic desperation. Yes, he paid his tab and prepared to leave. Meredith placed a hand on his arm. "We should have you over for dinner next week," she said. Just a small gathering. Robert would love to see you, and there's someone I'd like you to meet. Someone? Jesse raised an eyebrow. Caroline Whitmore. She's joined the board at the art museum. Brilliant woman, recently divorced. Meredith smiled knowingly. No pressure, of course. Just thought you might enjoy the conversation. I appreciate the thought. Jesse kept his tone non-committal. Let me check my schedule and get back to you. As he walked to his car, Jesse mentally reviewed the evening's progress. Meredith Brown had taken the bait exactly as expected. The whispers about Anna would spread through their social circle, growing with each retelling. Meanwhile, Diane Brennan would be making discreet inquiries about Nextech's financials, causing ripples of concern among potential investors. The seeds of chaos had been planted. Now, he just needed to nurture them. The following afternoon, Jesse sat in a quiet corner of the wine bar on Battery Park Avenue, nursing a glass of Cabernet as he watched Sophie navigate the crowded space with Greta Vaughn in tow. Hank's ex-wife was striking, tall, and angular, with short silver hair and the confident bearing of someone comfortable with power. Her art gallery was one of the most prestigious in Asheville, showcasing works that regularly sold for six figures. Sophie made introductions, and Jesse stood to shake Greta's hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Curiosity got the better of me," Greta replied, her voice rich and slightly raspy. "When Sophie mentioned you wanted to discuss Hank, well," she shrugged elegantly. "Let's just say I rarely turn down opportunities to reminisce about my ex-husband." The sarcasm in her tone was unmistakable. Jesse signaled for the server and waited until Greta had ordered a glass of Sancerre before continuing. "I'll be direct," he said once the server had moved away. "I believe we may have common interests regarding Hank Vance." Greta studied him with sharp gray eyes. "You're the husband, aren't you? Of his latest acquisition." "Ex-husband, soon enough," Jesse corrected. "Anna made her choice. As did I, once upon a time." Greta accepted her wine from the returning server. "Hank has a type, you know. Smart, beautiful women with social connections he can exploit. He collects us like trophies, uses us until we lose our shine, then discards us when something newer catches his eye." "That seems to be the pattern," Jesse agreed. "So," Greta took a sip of her wine, "what exactly are these common interests you mentioned? Revenge? Commiseration? A support group for those left in Hank Vance's wake?" "Information," Jesse replied simply. "And perhaps a strategic alliance." Greta raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. And what would this alliance entail?" "That depends on what you want, Ms. Vaughn. Call me Greta." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "What I want is simple. I want Hank to experience exactly what he inflicts on others. The feeling of having everything you've built stripped away. The exposure of being revealed as a fraud." Sophie, who had been quiet until now, exchanged a glance with Jesse. "That's quite specific. I had 3 years of therapy to get specific about my feelings," Greta said dryly. "And you, Mr. Hale? What do you want?" "I want truth to have consequences," Jesse said. "Hank built his success on lies, stolen ideas, financial manipulation, exploitation of those who trusted him. I want those facts to become common knowledge." "And your wife? What happens to her in this scenario?" "Ex-wife," Jesse corrected again. "And as I said, Anna made her choice. She tied her future to Hank's. Whatever happens to him happens to her, by extension." Greta studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A wounded man seeking emotional revenge. Someone I could manipulate." She smiled slightly. "Instead, I find a strategist with ice water in his veins. Much more useful." "So we understand each other," Jesse concluded. "I believe we do." Greta raised her glass in a small toast. "You want to destroy him too, don't you?" "I don't want destruction," Jesse replied, echoing her gesture with his own glass. "I want ruin." Greta's smile widened. "Even better." She set down her wine and leaned forward. "So, what's your plan?" For the next hour, they talked strategy. Sophie contributed legal insights, while Greta provided invaluable information about Hank's vulnerabilities. His gambling habit, disguised as high-risk investments, his pattern of sexual harassment covered up through NDAs, the shell companies he used to hide financial issues at Nextech. The merger with Astra Global is his Hail Mary, Greta explained. Nextech's flagship product has critical security flaws they've been hiding. If that information leaks before the merger closes, his stock would collapse, Jesse finished. And with it, his reputation as a tech visionary. Exactly. Greta's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I've been sitting on this information, waiting for the right moment. The right ally. And you believe I'm that ally? Jesse asked. I believe you're motivated, strategic, and unlikely to act on emotion. Greta glanced at Sophie. Your sister speaks highly of your capabilities. Jesse doesn't make mistakes, Sophie confirmed. When he commits to a course of action, he sees it through. Greta nodded. Decision made. Then I think we can help each other. As they finalized their agreement, Jesse felt the last major piece of his strategy lock into place. With Greta's insider knowledge and his own strategic planning, Hank Vance's carefully constructed empire would crumble from within the perfect dose of poetic justice for a man who had built his success on destroying others. By the time they parted ways, the foundation for Hank's downfall was laid. Greta would feed information to key industry contacts about Nextech's security flaws. Jesse would ensure that information reached the right investors at the right time. And Sophie would monitor the legal implications, ensuring that none of their actions crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. As Jesse drove home that evening, he reflected on the day's progress. The whispers about Anna had already begun circulating through their social circle. Sophie had received 3 texts asking obliquely about Anna's situation. Diane Brennan had sent a brief, professional email thanking him for his insights regarding Nextech. And now Greta Vaughn had joined their cause, bringing with her the perfect weapon for Hank's undoing. Phase 2 was proceeding even better than he'd anticipated. The seeds of chaos had been planted in fertile ground, and the first shoots were already breaking through the surface. Now it was simply a matter of waiting for them to grow. Jesse sat alone in his condo, the lights of downtown Asheville twinkling below as night settled over the mountains. His laptop displayed a series of emails forwarded from Greta's internal communications from Nextech that detailed the security flaws in their flagship product and the increasingly desperate attempts to hide them from potential investors. It had been 3 weeks since their meeting at the wine bar, 3 weeks of careful, behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The plan was working with a precision that would have been satisfying if Jesse allowed himself to feel satisfaction. Instead, he remained focused, methodical, his emotions locked away as he orchestrated the downfall of the man who had stolen his wife. His secure phone, a prepaid device used only for this purpose, buzzed with a text from Greta. Astra Global requested additional security audit before finalizing merger. Hank, panicking, called emergency board meeting for tomorrow. Jesse typed a response. Timing is perfect. Is your contact at Astra ready with the whistleblower information? Ready and waiting. Just needed confirmation from us. Proceed as planned. In the other matter, there was a longer pause before Greta's response came through. Anna visited the gallery today, asking questions about me and Hank. She looks terrible trying to hide it, but obvious she's not sleeping. Mentioned trouble between them. I played sympathetic, suggested lunch next week. This was an unexpected development, but not an unwelcome one. Jesse considered the implications before responding. Accept the lunch invitation. Information gathering only. We need to know where they stand. Understood. We'll report back. Jesse set the phone aside and returned to the Nextech documents. Orchestrating Hank's downfall required precision timing. The merger news had driven Nextech's stock to record highs, creating the perfect conditions for a devastating fall. When the security flaws became public knowledge, followed by the whistleblower reports about financial irregularities, the collapse would be swift and total. The knock at his door interrupted his concentration. Jesse wasn't expecting visitors. He closed his laptop and moved silently to the entry, checking the peephole. Anna stood in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Her appearance was a far cry from her usual polished perfection. Her clothes were expensive but rumpled, her makeup failing to hide the shadows under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than her usual salon-perfect style. Jesse remained perfectly still, watching her through the peephole. She knocked again, harder this time. Jesse, Please, she called, her voice muffled by the door. I know you're in there. Your car is in the parking garage. He made no sound, no movement. I just want to talk, she continued. 5 minutes. Please. Her voice broke on the last word. I've made a terrible mistake. Jessie watched as she pressed her forehead against the door, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Tears streaked her makeup as she whispered, Please, I have nowhere else to go. After nearly a minute of silence, Anna straightened, wiping roughly at her tears. Her expression hardened as she reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope, and slid it under the door. Fine, she said, her voice steadier now. You win. You were right about Hank. About everything. She stepped back from the door. But I'm not giving up, Jessie. We built something together. That doesn't just disappear. Jessie waited until the sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway before he bent to retrieve the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the paper expensive stationery they'd once kept in the desk at their old home. Anna's handwriting was less precise than usual, the letters sometimes trailing off in a way that suggested emotional distress. Several spots on the paper showed water-damaged tears that had fallen as she wrote. Jessie, I don't know if you'll read this, but I have to try. You were right about Hank. About all of it. He's not the man I thought he was. The charm wears off quickly when you're living with him. The control, the anger, the lying, it's unbearable that I left him yesterday. I couldn't take it anymore. The way he speaks to me when we're alone. Nothing like the man who swept me off my feet. He monitors my calls, checks my texts, questions where I've been. Last week, he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises when I mentioned visiting Sophie that I know I have no right to ask for your help or even your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. I threw away everything we built together for a fantasy that turned into a nightmare that I miss our life. I miss you. Not just the stability, not just the comfort. You, Jessie, your quiet strength, your intelligence, the way you always knew exactly what to say. I was a fool to mistake your calm for coldness. If you're willing to talk, just talk. Please call me. I'm staying at the Willow Glen Extended Stay on Marymount. Room 214. I'm sorry. More than you'll ever know. Anna Jessie read the letter twice, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. Then he folded it precisely along its original creases and returned it to the envelope. He placed it on his desk next to his laptop, a new data point to factor into his calculations. The timing was significant. Anna's appearance at his door coincided with the beginning of Hank's professional troubles. The security audit, the delayed merger, the questions from investors. It confirmed what Jessie had predicted from the start. As Hank's world began to crumble, he would take out his frustrations on those closest to him. Anna, having tied her fate to his, was experiencing the first tremors of the earthquake Jessie had engineered. His phone rang. Sophie, according to the caller ID. You've heard, she said when he answered. About Anna's visit to your condo. Taylor saw her in your building lobby, looking like she'd been crying. Word travels fast. Jessie moved to the window, gazing out at the city. Yes, she came by. Left a letter. Saying what? Sophie's voice was sharp with concern. That she's left Hank. That I was right about him. That she's sorry. Sophie made a sound of disgust. Of course she is. Now that she's burned all her bridges and Hank's turned out to be exactly what we warned her about. There was a pause. You're not considering taking her back, are you? No. The word was flat, definitive. Good. Sophie sounded relieved. Because the plan is working, Jessie. Diane Brennan pulled her client's investments from Nextech yesterday. The tech blogs are starting to whisper about security flaws. Hank's empire is showing cracks. I know. Jessie turned from the window. Anna's appearance confirms it. She wouldn't leave him unless things were deteriorating rapidly. So what now? We continue as planned. Jessie glanced at Anna's letter. Her departure from Hank actually accelerates our timeline. With Anna gone, he'll become more erratic, more prone to mistakes. And what about her? What do we do with Anna? Jessie considered the question. Nothing. We do nothing. She's already served her purpose in this phase. Cold, Sophie commented, though her tone held a note of approval. Strategic, Jessie corrected. Anna made her choice. Now she faces the consequences. After ending the call with Sophie, Jessie sat at his desk, and opened a new document on his laptop. He titled it Phase 3, Collapse, and began outlining the final stage of his plan. With Anna now separated from Hank, new possibilities emerged, ways to use her isolation and desperation to accelerate Hank's downfall. As he typed, Jesse felt a cold satisfaction settling into his bones. The pieces were moving exactly as he'd predicted, each action triggering precisely the reaction he'd anticipated. The strategy was working flawlessly. His secure phone buzzed with another text from Greta. Security audit results leaked to TechWatch. Article runs tomorrow morning. Astra putting merger on hold pending further investigation. Ready for next step? Jesse typed his response. Proceed with investor contacts. Time for the financial irregularities to surface. 3 days later, Jesse sat in a corner booth at Sovereign Remedies, nursing a single malt scotch as he observed the bar's evening crowd. He hadn't planned to be here tonight. It was a calculated risk, being seen in public as Hank Vance's world began to implode, but the opportunity had presented itself too perfectly to ignore. Across the room, Hank himself sat at the bar, drinking steadily, his tie loosened and his usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. The TechWatch article had hit that morning, revealing critical security flaws in Nextech's flagship product and raising questions about the company's quality control processes. The stock had dropped 18% by closing bell, and Astra Global had officially announced they were reconsidering all aspects of the proposed merger. Hank was alone, which was interesting. No colleagues, no friends, no Anna. Just a man watching his carefully constructed facade begin to crack, seeking solace in expensive bourbon. That Jesse's phone vibrated with a text from Sophie. Are you seriously at Sovereign Remedies right now? Miles just texted me that you and Hank are both there. Bad idea. Jesse. He ignored the message, continuing his quiet observation. This wasn't part of the plan, but sometimes opportunities presented themselves unexpectedly. Seeing Hank in person, watching him unravel in real time, it provided valuable tactical information. The bar was crowded, the noise level high enough that Jesse could observe without being immediately noticed. He watched as Hank checked his phone repeatedly, his expression darkening with each glance. Twice, he made calls that went unanswered, his frustration visibly mounting. Then, something unexpected happened. Miles Turner entered the bar, spotted Hank, and after a moment's hesitation, approached him. Jesse couldn't hear their conversation over the ambient noise, but the body language was clear. Miles was being deferential, Hank dismissive. Then Hank said something that caused Miles to stiffen, his friendly expression faltering. Jesse adjusted his position slightly, trying to get a better view without drawing attention. Miles was now speaking more animatedly, gesturing in a way that suggested disagreement. Hank's posture became increasingly aggressive, his finger jabbing toward Miles's chest. The bartender moved closer to their position, clearly monitoring the situation. Miles took a step back, hands raised in a placating gesture. Hank grabbed his arm, a motion Jesse recognized from Anna's letter describing Hank's controlling behavior. The bartender intervened then, saying something to Hank that caused him to release Miles. Words were exchanged, voices raised enough that heads turned throughout the bar. Then the bartender pointed toward the door, his message clear. Leave now. Hank stood, swaying slightly, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. He grabbed his jacket and phone, knocked back the remainder of his drink, and stormed toward the exit directly into Jesse's line of sight. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. Recognition dawned on Hank's face, followed by a flash of pure hatred. Jesse maintained eye contact, his expression calm and unreadable. It was Hank who looked away first, shoving past a couple near the door and disappearing into the night. Miles, still at the bar, finally spotted Jesse. After a brief conversation with the bartender, he made his way through the crowd. Jesse, he greeted, sliding into the booth opposite him. I thought that was you. Did you see what just happened? I saw Hank seemed upset. Jesse replied neutrally. Upset? He was ready to take my head off. Miles shook his head, still visibly rattled. All because I asked how the merger was going. I mean, it's public knowledge they're having issues, right? It was in the news this morning. What exactly did he say? Jesse asked, genuinely curious. First, he told me to mind my own business. Then when I mentioned I had some next tech stock and was concerned, he said, and I quote, "If you believe what those tech blog hacks write, you deserve to lose your money." Miles signaled for the bartender. When I pressed about the security flaws, he grabbed my arm and told me I had no idea who I was messing with. "That sounds unpleasant," Jesse commented, taking a sip of his scotch. Unpleasant? It was threatening. Miles lowered his voice. "Between us, I've heard things aren't going well at Nextech. Richard Barnes at First Capital pulled his investment yesterday, and he's not the only one. And now Anna's left him too. Did you know that?" Jesse kept his expression carefully neutral. "I'd heard rumors. Well, they're true. My wife saw her moving into that extended stay place on Merrimon yesterday. Looks like the fairy tale romance didn't last long." Miles shook his head sympathetically. "Can't say I'm surprised. Hank always seemed intense. And after seeing him tonight, well, indeed." Jesse finished his drink and signaled for the check. It's unfortunate when people show their true colors too late. Speaking of Anna, Miles leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "She's been asking about you. Called Nancy twice last week, wanted to know if we'd seen you, if you're doing okay. She seemed pretty desperate to connect." "Did she?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah. Nancy told her you seem to be doing fine. Moving on with your life." Miles studied Jesse's face, which seems accurate from what I can see. "You look good, Jesse. Centered." "Thank you, Miles. I appreciate that." Jesse paid his bill and stood. "If you'll excuse me, I have an early meeting tomorrow." Of course. Miles nodded eagerly. "Good to see you out and about again. Don't be a stranger." As Jesse walked to his car, he mentally reviewed the evening's unexpected developments. Seeing Hank unraveling in person had been illuminating. The man's control was slipping faster than anticipated. His public confrontation with Miles would spread through their social circles by morning, further damaging his reputation as the polished, charismatic tech visionary. More importantly, Miles had confirmed Anna's isolation. She was reaching out to peripheral acquaintances, seeking information about Jesse, while staying at a modest extended-stay hotel, a far cry from the luxury she'd been accustomed to with both Jesse and Hank. Everything was proceeding according to plan, albeit faster than expected. The puppet master had pulled his strings, and the marionettes were dancing exactly as intended. The next morning, Jesse's secure phone buzzed with a text from Greta. "Financial whistleblower info hitting Wall Street Journal tomorrow. Hank called me last night, drunk, accusing me of orchestrating his downfall. Getting erratic. Perfect timing." Jesse replied, "Proceed with Phase 3. Time to deliver the final blow." That evening, as he reviewed the latest Nextech stock reports down another 12% following rumors of the financial irregularities, Jesse's regular phone rang. Unknown number, but the local area code. "Jesse Hale." He answered, his voice neutral. "Jesse." Anna's voice was thin, strained. "Thank you for picking up. I wasn't sure you would." He remained silent, waiting. "Did you get my letter?" she asked after a moment. "I did. And nothing, Anna. Your situation with Hank is unfortunate, but not my concern." Her breath caught audibly. "I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm asking, begging for a chance to talk. In person. To what end? To explain. To apologize properly. To..." She hesitated. "I don't know. To see if there's anything left to salvage." "There isn't." Jesse's voice remained calm, matter of fact. "You made your choice, Anna. You calculated the odds and decided Hank offered better value. That calculation was flawed, but it was still your decision. People make mistakes," she whispered. "Terrible mistakes. They do. And mistakes have consequences." There was a long silence before Anna spoke again, her voice hardening slightly. "Is that what this is about? Making sure I face consequences? This isn't about anything, Anna. There's no this. Our marriage is over. Your relationship with Hank is over. These are simply facts. You knew, didn't you?" Her tone shifted, realization dawning. "You knew exactly what would happen with Hank. You warned me that night at dinner, but I was too blind to see it." Jesse didn't confirm or deny. "Is there anything else you needed, Anna? I have work to finish." "Work?" She gave a brittle laugh. "Always work. Always the strategic mind. Always 3 steps ahead of everyone else." Her voice cracked. "Did you ever love me at all?" Jesse? Or was I just another variable in your equations? The question hung between them, loaded with implication. Jesse considered his response carefully. I loved the person I thought you were, he said finally. That person wouldn't have done what you did. The line went quiet except for the sound of Anna's uneven breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft he could barely hear it. I still love you. No, you don't. Jesse's tone remained gentle but firm. You love the stability I represented. You love the life we built. That's not the same thing as loving me. That's not fair. Anger crept into her voice. You don't get to tell me what I feel. Perhaps not, but I do get to decide what matters to me now. Jesse glanced at his watch. Goodbye, Anna. Wait. He ended the call, setting his phone on silent before returning to his work. The conversation had gone exactly as he'd expected. Anna's emotional appeals, her attempt to rewrite history, her shift from pleading to anger when those approaches failed. Predictable. Human nature was remarkably consistent when under pressure. His secure phone buzzed with a final text from Greta. It's done. Wall Street Journal contacted Hank for comment on tomorrow's story. He's panicking, calling emergency board meeting for 7 a.m. Whistleblower providing concrete evidence of financial fraud. This is the end for him. Jesse stared at the message for a long moment before typing his response. Perfect. Maintain distance now. Let gravity do the rest. The puppet master had arranged all the pieces. Now it was time to watch them fall. The morning dawned clear and cool over Asheville, sunlight glinting off the glass facades of downtown buildings as Jesse stood at his condo window, coffee in hand. His phone lay on the kitchen counter, screen illuminated with notification after notification, news alerts, text messages, emails all centered on a single breaking story. Nextech CEO under investigation. Securities fraud allegations rock tech darling. The Wall Street Journal's headline was just the beginning. By noon, every financial news outlet would have their own version of the story, each adding new details, new allegations, new quotes from sources close to the matter. The careful groundwork Jesse had laid over the past weeks was bearing fruit with a speed and thoroughness that even he hadn't fully anticipated. His regular phone rang Sophie, calling for the third time that morning. This time, he answered. Have you seen it? She asked without preamble. I have. It's worse than we expected. The SEC is involved now. Formal investigation announced an hour ago. Sophie's voice held a note of awe. Nextech stock is in free fall down 62%, and trading has been halted. It's a bloodbath. Jesse sipped his coffee. Predictable outcome when years of financial manipulation come to light. This goes beyond manipulation, Jesse. The Wall Street Journal article cites internal documents showing Hank knowingly misrepresented security features to investors. That's textbook securities fraud. He could face criminal charges. Indeed, Jesse replied, his tone neutral despite the cold satisfaction settling in his chest. And they're connecting it to the Astra global merger, suggesting he was trying to unload Nextech before the problems became public. The board has called an emergency meeting. I'm aware. Sophie paused. Of course you are. You orchestrated this whole thing. Her voice lowered. Greta's whistleblower contact came through beautifully. She was motivated. And Anna? Any word? Jesse moved away from the window. No, nor do I expect any. Liar, Sophie said, but her tone was gentle. I know she's been trying to reach you. Miles told me she's been asking everyone about you. Her concern comes too late to matter. Maybe. Sophie hesitated. But be careful, Jesse. When people get desperate, they become unpredictable. After ending the call, Jesse methodically prepared for the day ahead. His meeting with Meridian CEO was scheduled for 11 a.m., a discussion about his potential return from extended leave. The timing was deliberate. As Hank Vance's empire crumbled publicly, Jesse Hale would quietly reestablish his professional standing, creating a stark contrast between the two. As he knotted his tie, his secure phone buzzed with a text from Greta. Board meeting in chaos. 3 directors already resigned. Hank shouting at everyone, blaming corporate espionage. Security escorted him from building when he threatened legal counsel. Nextech is finished. Jesse didn't reply. There was no need. The plan had moved beyond the point where his direct involvement was necessary. Gravity would handle the rest. By the time he reached Meridian's offices, located in a renovated historic building on the edge of downtown, 4 news vans had parked outside Nextech's headquarters 2 blocks away. Journalists clustered on the sidewalk, cameras ready, waiting for the next development in the spectacular implosion of what had been Asheville's most celebrated tech company. Jesse navigated around them, his expression betraying nothing as he entered Meridian's lobby. The receptionist greeted him warmly. "Mr. Hale, it's good to see you back. Mr. Brennan is expecting you." "Thank you, Claire." Jesse checked his watch precisely on time. "I'll head up." Robert Brennan, Meridian's CEO and founder, stood as Jesse entered his corner office. A tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd started his career working loading docks before building a logistics empire. Brennan had always respected Jesse's strategic mind. "Jesse," he extended his hand. "Good to have you back in the building. You've been missed." "Thank you, Robert." Jesse shook his hand firmly. "It's good to be back." They settled into the seating area near the windows, which offered a clear view of the commotion outside Nextech. Brennan gestured toward the scene. "Quite the spectacle this morning. You've heard about Vance?" "I have. Nasty business." Brennan shook his head. "Not entirely surprising, though. Companies that grow that fast often cut corners. Though in this case, it seems to have been outright fraud." He studied Jesse carefully. "I understand there's a personal connection there." Jesse met his gaze evenly. "My soon-to-be ex-wife made some unfortunate choices." "Ah." Brennan nodded, understanding. "Well, I won't pry. I'm more interested in your plans moving forward. Your leave of absence is scheduled to end next week. The team has managed in your absence, but they're eager to have you back. As am I. I appreciate that. And yes, I'm ready to return." Jesse leaned forward slightly. "In fact, I've been working on some ideas during my time away. A new approach to our Asia-Pacific expansion that could increase efficiency by 28% while reducing overhead." Brennan's eyebrows rose with interest. 28%? That's ambitious, but achievable. I've run the models. Jesse reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim folder. "The preliminary numbers are all here. I can have the full proposal on your desk by Monday." As they discussed the details of Jesse's proposal, the contrast between the 2 offices' Meridian's steady, methodical growth versus Nextech's spectacular rise and fall could not have been clearer. It was exactly the image Jesse had wanted to project. Stability, reliability, strategic thinking versus Hank's flash, deception, and inevitable collapse. "This looks promising," Brennan said finally, closing the folder. "Draft the full proposal, and we'll discuss implementation next week. It's good to see you haven't lost your edge. If anything, it's sharper now." Jesse stood, extending his hand again. "Thank you for your patience during my absence. Family matters take priority, Jesse. Always." Brennan rose as well. "Though if you don't mind me saying, you seem different. More focused, if that's possible. Clarity comes at a cost, Robert, but it's worth the price." As Jesse left the building, his phone buzzed with notifications of more breaking news about Nextech. He ignored them, focusing instead on his next appointment. The real estate agent was meeting him at 1 p.m. to finalize paperwork on his new condo. The transitory furnished unit had served its purpose, but now it was time for something more permanent. A clean slate, uncontaminated by memories of Anna or the life they'd shared. He was halfway to his car when a familiar voice called his name. "Jesse! Jesse, wait." He turned to see Anna hurrying across the street toward him, narrowly avoiding a delivery truck that honked angrily as she passed. She looked worse than when she'd come to his door, her clothes still expensive but rumpled, her hair pulled back haphazardly, dark circles visible beneath her eyes despite careful makeup. "Please," she said as she reached him, slightly out of breath. "Just 5 minutes. Please." Jesse checked his watch deliberately. "I have an appointment." "I know. You always do." Anna's voice held a note of desperation. "But this is important. You've seen the news about Hank." "I have. It's a disaster. The SEC, the investors pulling out, the board turning on him." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "He's blaming me, Jesse. Says I must have stolen documents, fed information to competitors. He came to my hotel last night, pounding on the door, threatening me. Jesse regarded her impassively. That sounds frightening. Have you contacted the police? Anna stared at him, momentarily thrown by his detached response. The police? No, Jesse, I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. Indeed it is. You don't seem surprised. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Do you know something about what's happening to Hank? I know that fraudulent business practices eventually come to light. Jesse replied evenly. I know that men like Hank Vance believe they're above the rules until reality proves otherwise. And I know that those who tie their fortunes to such men often share their fate. Anna flinched as if he'd slapped her. You think I deserve this? I think choices have consequences. You chose Hank. I made a mistake. Her voice rose, drawing glances from passers-by. A terrible mistake that I've been trying to apologize for. I left him. I admitted I was wrong. So you did, Jesse acknowledged. Unfortunately, timing matters in both business and relationships. Your apology comes too late to be actionable. Tears welled in Anna's eyes, but there was anger there too. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Seeing us both destroyed. No, Anna. I take no pleasure in your suffering. Jesse's voice remained calm. But I won't pretend to mourn Hank's downfall, nor will I offer rescue from a situation you created. Created? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You had something to do with this, didn't you? The timing right when I left him, right when I reached out to you. It's too perfect. That's an interesting theory. It's not a theory. I know how you think, Jesse. How you plan. How you see 10 moves ahead while everyone else is still deciding their first. Anna searched his face. You're destroying him, and you don't care if I go down with him. You're upset, Jesse said simply, and looking for someone to blame beside yourself. Don't. Anna's voice hardened. Don't use that calm, reasonable tone like I'm being hysterical. I know you, Jesse Hale, better than you think. If that were true, you wouldn't have left me for Hank in the first place. Jesse checked his watch again. I need to go. My real estate agent is waiting. Real estate agent? You're buying property now. A condo downtown. Something permanent. Anna's expression faltered, the reality of Jesse moving on seeming to hit her freshly. So that's it? You've completely written me out of your life. You wrote yourself out, Anna. I'm simply acknowledging what's already happened. Jesse stepped back. Goodbye. Wait. She reached for his arm, but he smoothly moved beyond her grasp. What am I supposed to do now? Hank's threatening me. I have nowhere to go. My reputation in this town is ruined. Those are significant challenges, Jesse acknowledged, but not mine to solve. I suggest starting with a restraining order if Hank's behavior is threatening. The police can help with that. He turned and walked away, ignoring her calling his name again. In his car, he glanced in the rearview mirror to see Anna standing where he'd left her, arms wrapped around herself as if for protection, watching him drive away. The encounter had been inevitable, Anna's desperation making it only a matter of time before she confronted him directly. He had prepared for it, rehearsed his responses, maintained the calm detachment that he knew would unnerve her more than anger ever could. What he hadn't fully anticipated was the hollow feeling that followed. Not regret, not exactly, but an awareness that victory, even meticulously planned victory, carried its own cost. His phone rang. The real estate agent, wondering if he was running late. Jesse pushed the hollow feeling aside, focusing on the practical matter at hand. The past was ash. Only the future mattered now. Later that afternoon, as Jesse signed the final paperwork on his new condo, his secure phone buzzed with a text from Greta. Board formally removed Hank as CEO. Appointed CFO as interim leader. Stock still suspended from trading. Hank went ballistic in the parking garage, security footage leaking online. Coming to speak to you in person. Meet at the gallery at 7. Jesse sent a brief confirmation and returned to the documents before him, signing where indicated with his precise, controlled handwriting. The new condo was perfect, modern, minimalist, with views of the mountains and downtown. A place where he could begin again, unencumbered by reminders of Anna. Congratulations, Mr. Hale, the agent said, beaming as he handed over the keys. The place is officially yours. The sellers were thrilled with the all-cash offer and quick closing. "Thank you, Melissa. You've been very helpful throughout this process. Will you be moving in right away?" she asked. "Yes. My temporary lease ends next week." Perfect timing. As he drove to Greta's gallery that evening, Jesse monitored the continuing coverage of Nextech's collapse on the car radio. The story had evolved throughout the day, with new revelations emerging hourly. Former employees coming forward with stories of toxic leadership. Investors announcing lawsuits. The SEC expanding its investigation to include personal financial transactions by key executives. Hank Vance's carefully constructed image was being shredded in real time, his reputation dismantled as thoroughly as his company's stock price. By morning, he would be a pariah in the business world, his name synonymous with fraud and failure. The Blue Ridge Gallery occupied a renovated warehouse in Asheville's River Arts District. Its stark white walls and polished concrete floors the perfect backdrop for the contemporary art Greta favored. When Jesse arrived, the closed sign was already hanging on the door, but Greta let him in immediately. "You should see the full video," she said by way of greeting, leading him through the main gallery space toward her office in the back. Hank completely lost it in the parking garage, screaming about conspiracies, throwing his briefcase at the security guard. "It's gone viral already." Jesse followed her, noting how the gallery's overhead lights cast sharp shadows across the abstract paintings lining the walls. The board decision was unanimous, 9-0. Greta's satisfaction was evident in her voice. They're already trying to distance themselves, claiming they were misled about the security issues and financial reporting. In her office, a stylish space with a glass desk and walls covered in exhibition posters, Greta poured 2 glasses of wine from an open bottle. "This calls for a celebration, don't you think?" Jesse accepted the glass but didn't drink. A recognition of outcomes, perhaps. Always so measured. Greta studied him over a glass. "Even in victory. This isn't about victory." "No? Then what would you call it?" She gestured toward her computer, where headlines about Nextech's collapse filled the screen. "Hank is ruined professionally, financially, soon to be legally. Exactly as we planned. Justice," Jesse said simply. "The natural consequence of his actions." Greta laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet gallery. "Justice. I like that. Cleaner than revenge." She took a seat behind her desk. "And what about Anna? Have you heard from her? She confronted me outside my office today. She suspects I had something to do with Hank's downfall." "Smart woman." Greta raised an eyebrow. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing confirmable." Jesse remained standing, glass untouched in his hand. "She made her choice. Now she lives with the consequences." "Cold," Greta observed, though her tone suggested admiration rather than criticism. "Effective but cold." "Strategic," Jesse corrected. "Emotions cloud judgment." Greta nodded slowly, studying him with renewed interest. "You know, when Sophie first approached me about this alliance, I wondered if you'd have the stomach for it. If your feelings for Anna might interfere with what needed to be done." I compartmentalize effectively. Clearly, Greta sipped her wine. "So what now?" "Hank's destroyed. Anna's isolated and desperate. Your vengeance is complete. What does Jesse Hale do with the rest of his life?" The question echoed Sophie's concerns from weeks earlier. Jesse had prepared for it. "I focus on my work. Build something lasting. Alone. For now. Later, we'll see." Greta set down her glass, her expression becoming more serious. "One thing I learned after my divorce from Hank: revenge satisfies, but only temporarily. Building something new, something meaningful, that's what truly heals." "I'm not seeking healing, Greta. I'm seeking forward motion." "Same thing, different words." She stood, extending her hand across the desk. "Well, our alliance has served its purpose. You've been a formidable partner, Jesse Hale. I almost feel sorry for anyone who crosses you in the future." Jesse shook her hand firmly. "The feeling is mutual. Your insights were invaluable." "And my whistleblower contact?" Greta asked. "Any concern about that connection being traced back to us?" "None. Everything was handled through proper channels. Anonymous tips, public information, legal processes." Jesse set his untouched wine on the desk. "We simply help the truth emerge more efficiently." Efficient truth. Greta smiled. I like that. As Jesse left the gallery, stepping into the cool evening air, he felt a sense of completion. Phase 3 had unfolded perfectly. Hank's empire crumbling from within, his reputation shattered, his future in serious jeopardy. Anna, who had tied her fate to Hank's, was experiencing exactly the isolation and desperation Jesse had predicted. Justice had been served, cold and precise. Why did victory feel so hollow? 3 days later, Jesse sat in his office at Meridian Logistics, reviewing quarterly projections with a focus and precision that had earned him his reputation. His return to work had been seamless, the team welcoming him back, the Asia-Pacific expansion proposal already approved by the board. On the surface, his life had reset, as if the disruption of Anna's betrayal had been nothing more than a temporary system glitch, now corrected. But beneath that surface, something had changed. The satisfaction he'd expected to feel at Hank's downfall had been muted, fleeting. The strategic victory, while complete, felt somehow insufficient. Sophie had noticed it during their dinner the previous night. You got exactly what you wanted, she'd observed, studying him across the table. Hank destroyed. Anna isolated. Justice served. So why do you seem, I don't know, empty? I'm not empty, Jesse had replied. I'm recalibrating. Recalibrating. Sophie had repeated the word skeptically. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you achieved your goal and discovered it wasn't as satisfying as you expected. Jesse had changed the subject, steering their conversation towards Sophie's law practice, but her observation lingered uncomfortably in his mind. Now, as evening approached and the office emptied, Jesse remained at his desk, immersed in work that demanded his full attention. The familiar rhythm of strategic planning and logical analysis had always centered him, provided clarity when emotions threatened to cloud judgment. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Have you seen the news? Hank's been charged. Securities fraud, wire fraud, investor deception. This is bigger than we anticipated. Jesse set the phone aside without responding. He'd seen the headlines earlier. Hank Vance's downfall was now complete, his arrest a matter of public record, his mugshot circulating online. The carefully constructed persona of the brilliant tech visionary had been replaced by the reality of a desperate man in an orange jumpsuit, facing years in federal prison, but a knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. He looked up, expecting one of the few colleagues who might still be working late. Instead, Miles Turner stood in the doorway, his expression troubled. Jesse, I'm sorry to disturb you after hours. Your assistant said you were still here. Miles. Jesse gestured to the chair across from his desk. What brings you to Meridian? Miles entered hesitantly, taking the offered seat. I've been trying to reach you. It's about Anna. Jesse's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. What about her? I see. The thing is... Miles rubbed his hands together nervously. After Hank was arrested yesterday, he made bail. His lawyer claimed Anna was involved in the fraud somehow, that she had access to financial documents and helped leak them to competitors. That seems unlikely, Jesse commented, his voice neutral. Of course it is. Pure desperation on his part. But Anna's terrified. She's convinced Hank will come after her, blame her for everything. Miles leaned forward. She needs help, Jesse. Real help. A lawyer. Someone to protect her from Hank's accusations. Maybe you could talk to her. Jesse studied Miles carefully. The man was genuinely concerned, which made him useful. Where is she now? At our house. Nancy's with her. Miles hesitated. She's in bad shape, Jesse. Barely sleeping. Jumping at every noise. When the news about Hank's arrest broke, she had a full panic attack. Nancy had to call her doctor. I appreciate you looking out for her, Jesse said, his tone still professionally detached. But Anna and I are divorced in all but the final paperwork. Her situation, while unfortunate, isn't my responsibility. Miles's expression fell. I understand. I just thought, given your history together, history is precisely that, Miles. Past. Jesse turned back to his computer, a clear dismissal. Anna made choices that led to her current circumstances. Now she needs to make different choices to find her way out. That's pretty cold, Jesse. Miles stood, disappointment evident in his posture. "I always thought you were the kind of man who'd help someone in trouble, regardless of the past." "I'm the kind of man who believes in personal responsibility," Jesse corrected. Anna tied her fate to Hank Vance. Now she's experiencing the consequences of that decision. Miles shook his head sadly. "Well, I tried. For what it's worth, I think she truly regrets what she did. Says leaving you was the biggest mistake of her life." Regret doesn't change facts. After Miles left, Jesse remained at his desk, the conversation replaying in his mind. Anna staying with the Turners was an unexpected development, but not entirely surprising. She would need allies, protection from Hank's increasingly desperate attempts to shift blame. His phone rang Sophie again. "Miles Turner just left my office," Jesse said by way of greeting. "I know. He called me right after." Sophie's voice held a note of concern. "Jesse, we need to talk about Anna. There's nothing to discuss." "I disagree. Hank's making her a scapegoat. His lawyer is telling anyone who'll listen that she had access to Nextech's financial documents, that she might have been feeding information to competitors after their breakup." "A desperate tactic that won't work," Jesse replied dismissively. "Anna had no access to those documents." "You and I know that," Sophie agreed. "But a good lawyer could create enough doubt to spread the blame. And Anna can't afford the kind of legal representation she needs right now." Jesse's fingers tapped against his desk, considering implications. "What are you suggesting? That you help her? Provide legal support through this mess?" "Why would I do that?" Sophie sighed heavily. "Because despite everything, you're not cruel, Jesse. Strategic, calculating, even cold when necessary, but not cruel. And letting Anna take the fall for Hank's crimes would be cruel. She made her choice. Yes, and she's suffered for it." Sophie's voice hardened. "But this goes beyond consequences for betrayal. This is about an innocent person potentially facing criminal charges for something we know she didn't do." Jesse remained silent, weighing options, calculating outcomes. "Think about it," Sophie continued. "If Anna gets dragged into the legal proceedings, everything gets messy, eh? Investigations expand. Questions get asked about who benefited from Nextech's collapse. Is that what you want?" It was a valid strategic concern. Jesse had orchestrated Hank's downfall with surgical precision, ensuring no trails led back to him. Anna becoming a focus of the investigation could complicate matters. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "Good. That's all I ask." Sophie's tone softened slightly. "And Jesse? For what it's worth, I think helping Anna now could provide something your perfect revenge plan didn't. Closure." After ending the call, Jesse shut down his computer and gathered his things. The office was empty now, the building quiet except for the distant sound of cleaning staff. As he walked to the parking garage, he weighed Sophie's arguments against his own carefully constructed strategy. Helping Anna now hadn't been part of the plan. She was supposed to face the natural consequences of her choices: isolation, regret, the collapse of the life she'd imagined with Hank. But criminal charges, even baseless ones, went beyond justice into something else entirely. The strategic part of his mind calculated risk factors, potential complications, the value of legal intervention versus continued distance. The outcome was clear: providing Anna with legal protection served his interests by containing the situation and preventing expanded investigations. But beneath that cold calculation, something else stirred an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. That'd be why the time he reached his car, Jesse had made his decision. He would help Anna navigate the legal threats from Hank, but with clear boundaries. Professional assistance, not personal reconciliation. A strategic adjustment to protect his own interests. Nothing more. As he drove toward the Turner's neighborhood in North Asheville, Jesse rehearsed what he would say, how he would maintain the necessary emotional distance while offering practical assistance. But when he pulled up to the modest Tudor-style home, something unexpected happened. Anna was outside, sitting alone on the front steps, arms wrapped around herself in the cool evening air. When his headlights swept across the yard, she looked up, recognition dawning on her face as he parked at the curb. For a moment, neither moved. Then Anna stood, hesitant, as if uncertain whether to approach or retreat inside. Jessie turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. "Miles called you," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet neighborhood. "He came to my office." Jessie walked up the stone path, but stopped several feet from the steps, maintaining physical distance. "And Sophie called afterward." Anna nodded, understanding. "So, it took two people to convince you I was worth helping. I'm here to discuss a specific situation, Anna, not to revisit our past." "Of course." She gestured toward the house. "Miles and Nancy went to bed. They've been kind, but this is awkward for everyone." "I imagine it is." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. In the warm glow of the porch light, Jessie could see clearly how the past weeks had affected Anna. She'd lost weight, her cheekbones more prominent, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she brushed hair from her face. "Hank's lawyer is saying I helped leak financial documents," she said finally. "That I stole information and shared it with competitors after I left him. It's completely false, but Hank needs a scapegoat," Jessie finished. "Someone to share the blame now that his fraud has been exposed." "Yes." Anna's voice tightened. "He came to the hotel, Jessie, pounding on the door, shouting that he'd make me pay, that if he was going down, he'd take me with him. The management called security, but by the time they came, he was gone." "Have you filed for a restraining order?" "Yesterday, but it feels like too little, too late." She hugged herself tighter. "I can't afford a decent lawyer. Most of my money went into the joint account with Hank, and those assets are frozen now. The rest," she trailed off. "The rest went to maintaining appearances," Jessie supplied. "Designer clothes, expensive hotels, the lifestyle you chose." Anna flinched at the assessment, but didn't deny it. "Yes." Jessie studied her, noting the fear evident in her posture, the exhaustion lining her face. This was no longer the confident, calculating woman who had left him for a more exciting prospect. This was someone broken by her own choices, facing consequences far beyond what even justice demanded. "I'll arrange legal representation," he said finally. "Someone specialized in securities fraud cases who can ensure you're protected from Hank's accusations." Anna's eyes widened with surprise, then filled with tears. "Why would you do that?" "It's the right strategic move," Jessie replied, his tone businesslike. "Hank's attempts to implicate you unnecessarily complicate matters. Proper legal representation will contain the situation." "Strategic," Anna repeated, a sad smile touching her lips. "Of course. Everything with you is strategic. It's who I am, Anna. You knew that when you married me." "I did." She looked away, blinking back tears. "And I threw it away for flash and excitement. For someone who made me feel alive in the moment, without considering the future." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I was so stupid." Jessie didn't contradict her. "I'll have the lawyer contact you tomorrow. In the meantime, stay with the Turners if they're willing. It's safer than being alone." "Thank you." Anna took a step toward him, then stopped when he subtly shifted backward. "I know this doesn't change anything between us. I know what I did is unforgivable. But thank you for helping me anyway. It's not about forgiveness, Anna. It's about doing what's necessary." As he turned to leave, Anna called after him, her voice catching. "Jessie, for what it's worth, I really am sorry. Not just because everything fell apart with Hank, but because I hurt you. Because I threw away something real for something that was nothing but smoke and mirrors." Jessie paused, considering her words. "Noted," he said finally, and continued to see, as he drove away. He caught a glimpse of Anna in his rearview mirror, still standing on the steps, watching him leave, looking small and lost in the pool of porch light. The hollow feeling in his chest expanded slightly, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the road ahead. The next evening, Jessie sat in his new condo, unpacked boxes still stacked neatly in one corner. He'd hired movers to transfer his belongings from the temporary rental, but had done the unpacking himself, organizing each item with his characteristic precision. His phone rang an unknown number, but with a local area code. He considered letting it go to voicemail, then reconsidered. "Jesse Hale," he answered. "Mr. Hale, this is Detective Lawrence with the Asheville Police Department." The voice was male, professional. I'm calling regarding an incident involving Anna Hale and Hank Vance. Jesse's attention sharpened immediately. What incident? There was an altercation at the Turner residence this evening. Mr. Vance arrived, intoxicated and making threats. When Mrs. Turner called 911, he became violent, forced his way into the home. Is Anna all right? The question came automatically, surprising even Jesse with its urgency. Mrs. Hale sustained minor injuries, bruising primarily. She's being treated at Mission Hospital as a precaution. The detective paused. Mr. Vance is in custody, charged with breaking and entering, assault, and violation of the restraining order. I see. Jesse's mind raced through implications, next steps. And you're calling me because you're listed as Mrs. Hale's emergency contact, and she asked specifically that we notify you. This was unexpected. Jesse had assumed Anna would have changed her emergency contacts after leaving him. Thank you for the information, detective. Which hospital did you say? Mission Hospital. Emergency department. The detective hesitated. Mr. Hale, given the circumstances, I should mention that Mrs. Hale seemed quite distressed, beyond what the physical injuries would explain. She kept saying something about this being her fault, about consequences catching up to her. Something cold settled in Jesse's stomach. I'll head to the hospital now. Thank you for calling. Jesse grabbed his keys and coat, moving with uncharacteristic haste. As he drove toward Mission Hospital, his mind processed the detective's information, calculating possibilities, implications. Hank, desperate and facing criminal charges, had targeted Anna directly. The restraining order had failed to protect her. The Turners' home, which should have been a safe haven, had been violated, and Anna, injured and vulnerable, had asked for him. The emergency department was busy when Jesse arrived, but he was directed to a curtained bay where Anna sat on an examination table, a nurse checking her vital signs. She looked up as he approached, surprise flickering across her face. Jesse, you came. The police called. He moved to the side of the bed, taking in her appearance with a quick, assessing glance. A bruise was developing along her left cheekbone, and her right wrist was wrapped in an elastic bandage. Are you all right? I've been better. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hank showed up at Miles and Nancy's. He was drunk, ranting about how I'd ruined everything, how I'd betrayed him by talking to the SEC. Did you talk to the SEC? Jesse asked, genuinely curious. Anna shook her head. No, but apparently someone did. Someone with detailed knowledge of Nextech's financials and security issues. Hank is convinced it was me, getting revenge after our breakup. That doesn't make sense, Jesse said. You didn't have access to that level of information. Rationality isn't Hank's strong suit right now. Anna winced as the nurse finished checking her bruised wrist. He's facing years in prison, Jesse. His company is destroyed, his reputation ruined. He needs someone to blame. The nurse interrupted, addressing Anna. The doctor will be in shortly with your discharge instructions. The x-ray showed no fractures, just soft tissue injury. Take it easy for a few days, ice the bruises, and take the pain medication as prescribed. When they were alone again, Anna looked up at Jesse, her expression vulnerable. Miles and Nancy have been wonderful, but I can't go back there. Not after this. Hank knows where they live now. Jesse considered the implications. I've arranged for a lawyer to represent you, Karen Michaels. She's one of the best defense attorneys in the state. She'll meet with you tomorrow. Thank you. Anna hesitated. But that doesn't solve my immediate problem. I need somewhere safe to stay tonight. The request hung in the air between them. Jesse knew what she was asking, even if she wouldn't say it directly. There are secure hotels, he began. Hank found me at the extended stay, Anna interrupted. He's resourceful, especially when he's desperate. And right now, he's very desperate. Her voice dropped. I'm scared, Jesse. Really scared. Jesse studied her, noting the genuine fear in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. Whatever his feelings about their broken marriage, whatever satisfaction he'd taken in orchestrating Hank's downfall, he couldn't ignore the human being sitting before him, injured and terrified. You can stay at my condo, he said finally. The building has security. Hank won't be able to get past the front desk. Relief washed over Anna's face. Thank you. It's temporary, Jesse clarified. Just until we can arrange something more permanent. Of course. Anna nodded quickly. Understand. The doctor arrived then, providing care instructions and prescriptions. 30 minutes later, they were in Jesse's car, driving through Asheville's quiet streets toward downtown. The silence between them was tense, loaded with unspoken words and complicated history. Your new place, Anna said finally, breaking the silence. Is it nice? It's functional, Jesse replied. Clean, secure, minimalist, I bet. A small smile touched her lips. You always preferred clean lines. I was the one who insisted on all those decorative pillows you hated. Jesse didn't respond to the attempted nostalgia. You'll stay in the guest room. It's basic but comfortable. I've only just moved in myself, so things are still being organized. Thank you for doing this, Anna said softly. I know it's not easy having me around again. It's the rational solution to a temporary problem. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the modern glass building that housed Jesse's new condo, he nodded to the security guard at the desk, explaining that Anna was a guest who would be staying temporarily. The guard made a note in the system, his eyes lingering briefly on Anna's bruised face. The condo was on the 12th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering impressive views of downtown Asheville and the mountains beyond. As Jesse had indicated, the space was minimalist, clean lines, neutral colors, functional furniture with no unnecessary embellishments. Moving boxes were stacked neatly in one corner of the living area, but otherwise, the place was precisely organized. It suits you, Anna said, glancing around. I like it. Jesse led her to the guest room, a spare space with a queen bed, simple nightstand, and dresser. Bathroom is through there, he said, pointing to a door. Clean towels in the linen closet. I have an early meeting tomorrow, so I'll be gone by 7. Anna set down her small overnight bag that the Turners had hurriedly packed for her. Thank you, Jesse. Truly. He nodded once, then turned to leave. Jesse, Anna's voice stopped him at the door. I know you orchestrated Hank's downfall. He turned back slowly, expression neutral. Do you? Yes. Her voice was quiet but certain. The timing, the precision of it all, the security flaws exposed just as the merger was finalizing, the financial irregularities revealed at exactly the right moment to cause maximum damage. It has your signature all over it. Jesse didn't confirm or deny. An interesting theory. It's not a theory. I know how you operate. Anna's eyes held his steadily. You don't lash out in the moment. You plan. You wait. You identify vulnerabilities and exploit them with surgical precision. Perhaps Hank's vulnerabilities were simply there to be found by someone with inside knowledge, someone with connections in the industry. Anna shook her head slightly. I'm not angry, Jesse. I'm not even surprised. What Hank did to you, to me, to countless others, he deserved consequences. Everyone deserves the natural consequences of their choices, Jesse replied neutrally. Including me? Anna asked softly. Including everyone. She nodded slowly. Fair enough. I made my choice. I'm living with the consequences. She gestured to her bruised face. Some more painful than others. Get some rest, Anna. The lawyer will contact you in the morning. As Jesse turned again to leave, Anna spoke once more, her voice barely above a whisper. For what it's worth, I admire the elegance of it. Taking Hank down without ever getting your hands dirty. Making it look like his own actions catching up to him, which in a way they were. She paused. It's what always made you different from men like Hank. You don't need to dominate or control directly. You simply create the conditions where the only possible outcome is the one you desire. Jesse didn't respond to this assessment. He closed the door quietly behind him and walked to his own bedroom, his mind processing the unexpected turn of events. Anna staying in his home hadn't been part of any strategy he developed. It introduced variables, complications. Yet as he prepared for bed, Jesse found himself reviewing the day's developments with a strange sense of, not satisfaction, exactly, but something like completion. A circle closing, but he slept soundly that night, more deeply than he had in weeks. Jesse arrived home from work the following evening to find Anna sitting at his kitchen counter, papers spread before her as she spoke on the phone. She looked up as he entered, gesturing that she'd be done soon. Yes, Ms. Michaels, I understand, she was saying. I'll have those documents for you tomorrow. Thank you again for taking my case. She ended the call and turned to Jesse. Karen Michaels is impressive. Thank you for connecting us. She's the best defense attorney in Asheville, Jesse replied, setting his briefcase on the counter. What's her assessment? She thinks Hank's attempts to implicate me are desperate and unlikely to succeed. Anna gathered the papers into a neat stack. I never had access to Nextech's financial systems or security protocols. Any half-decent investigation will confirm that. Good. Jesse moved to the refrigerator, examining its minimal contents. Have you eaten? Not yet. I wasn't sure when you'd be home. Anna hesitated. I could cook something. I went to the store this afternoon, stocked up on a few basics. Jesse looked at her, surprised. You went out? After what happened yesterday? I had the security guard escort me to the corner market and back. Anna shrugged slightly. I needed to feel normal for an hour, and I wanted to contribute something, not just impose on your space. Jesse considered this, then nodded. What did you have in mind? Nothing fancy. Pasta with that pesto you used to like. Simple salad. It was such a mundane suggestion, so reminiscent of their former life, that Jesse felt a moment of disorientation, as if the past months had been erased, and they were simply a married couple discussing dinner plans after work. That sounds acceptable, he said finally. I'll change. When he returned to the kitchen 10 minutes later, wearing jeans and a casual shirt, Anna was already cooking. She moved with practiced efficiency, the familiar rhythm of someone who knew her way around a kitchen. The bruise on her cheek stood out starkly against her pale skin, a vivid reminder that nothing was normal about this situation. Kara mentioned that Hank's being held without bail now, Anna said as she stirred the pasta. After what happened at the Turners, the judge considered him a danger to others. That's good news, Jesse replied, taking plates from a cabinet. It means you're safe, at least temporarily. Temporarily being the operative word. Anna glanced at him. His arraignment for the securities fraud charges is next week. Karen thinks he'll ultimately make bail on those, despite the prosecutor's objections. Wealthy defendants usually do, Jesse agreed. But violating a restraining order and assaulting you, that complicates matters for him significantly. They ate at the small dining table near the windows, the lights of downtown Asheville twinkling below them. The conversation remained practical, focused on legal matters and next steps. No mention of their shared past, of the betrayal that had brought them to this strange, tense present. As they finished eating, Anna finally breached the unspoken boundary. I've been thinking about what happens next. After Hank's legal issues are resolved, one way or another, Jesse set down his fork. And I can't stay in Asheville. Anna met his gaze directly. Too many memories. Too much damage to my reputation. I need a fresh start somewhere new. A reasonable assessment. I've been offered a position with a marketing firm in Chicago, she continued. Former colleague reached out after hearing about the Nextech implosion. It's not as prestigious as what I had here, but it's a start. Jesse nodded, processing this information. When would you leave? 2 weeks. Assuming the immediate legal issues with Hank are contained by then. She hesitated. I wanted you to know. No more secrets. No more surprises. I appreciate that. Jesse studied her across the table. Chicago is a good city. Opportunities to rebuild. That's what I'm hoping. Anna began gathering their plates. I don't expect forgiveness, Jesse. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I wanted to thank you for helping me through this, despite everything. It means more than I can say. Jesse watched as she carried the dishes to the kitchen, her movements careful due to her injured wrist. Something stirred within him, not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps understanding. Anna had made a catastrophic choice and was now facing the consequences with a dignity he hadn't anticipated. His secure phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Greta. Final phase complete. Nextech being acquired by Astra at fire sale price. Former board members under investigation. Our friend is facing additional charges for financial malfeasance. Thought you'd want to know. Jesse read the message twice, then deleted it. The plan had worked flawlessly. Hank Vance was destroyed professionally, financially, legally. His company, once valued at hundreds of millions, was being sold for pennies on the dollar. His reputation was in ruins, his freedom in jeopardy. That it was the complete victory Jesse had engineered, the justice he'd sought for Anna's betrayal and Hank's arrogance. Oh, why did it feel so empty? 3 days later, Jesse sat in his home office, reviewing documents for a major logistics contract, while Anna met with Karen Michaels in the living room. Their temporary cohabitation had settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Jesse working long hours, Anna focusing on her legal defense and preparations for her move to Chicago. They shared occasional meals, maintained polite conversation, and carefully avoided any discussion of their fractured relationship. The arrangement worked because it had clear parameters and a defined endpoint. In 11 days, Anna would leave for Chicago. The divorce papers would be finalized shortly thereafter. They would return to being strangers, their 7 years together relegated to memory. Jesse looked up as Anna appeared in his office doorway, her expression troubled. "Karen just left," she said. "There's been a development." Jesse set aside his work. "What kind of development?" "The SEC has expanded their investigation. They're looking into who might have benefited from Nextech's collapse." Anna entered the office, perching tentatively on the edge of a chair. Specifically, they're examining short sales of Nextech stock in the weeks before the security flaws were revealed. Something cold settled in Jesse's stomach. This was an unexpected complication. "I see. Karen says they're casting a wide net, looking at anyone with potential knowledge of Nextech's problems who might have positioned themselves to profit from the company's downfall." Anna's eyes held his steadily. "Including former spouses of Nextech executives. Meaning you, and by extension, possibly you." Anna leaned forward slightly. "Jesse, if they start digging, if they look closely at financial transactions, communications, connections, they won't find anything." Jesse interrupted calmly. "Because there isn't anything to find." Anna studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Of course. You're too careful for that." She hesitated. "But, Jesse, the connection to Greta Vaughn. If investigators start looking at who benefited from Nextech's collapse, her name will emerge. And if they look at her communications, her meetings, this was a valid concern. Jesse had been meticulous in covering his tracks, but Greta was a potential vulnerability. Not because she would deliberately expose their arrangement, but because connections could be traced, patterns identified. "I'll handle it," he said simply. "How?" Anna pressed. "This isn't some minor issue that can be managed with a strategic email or carefully placed phone call. This is the SEC, Jesse. Federal investigators with subpoena power. I said I'll handle it." Jesse's tone was firm, but not harsh. "Trust me on this, if nothing else." Anna held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." She stood to leave, then paused. "Just be careful. Whatever happens with us, with the divorce, I don't want to see you hurt. Especially not because of choices I made." After she left, Jesse sat motionless, his mind rapidly calculating new scenarios, risk factors, countermeasures. The SEC investigation was an unexpected variable, but not an insurmountable one. The key was to eliminate any direct connections between himself, Greta, and the Nextech collapse that he reached for his secure phone, then reconsidered. Electronic communications were now a liability. This would require a face-to-face conversation. An hour later, Jesse sat across from Greta at a small table in the back corner of a cafe in West Asheville, far from their usual haunts, where they were unlikely to be recognized together. "This is unnecessary," Greta said after he explained the situation. "The SEC is just going through motions, casting a wide net. They have Hank dead to rights on the securities fraud. They don't need to look further. Federal investigators are thorough," Jesse countered quietly. "And they have resources we can't anticipate. We need to ensure there's nothing connecting us to what happened at Nextech." Greta sipped her coffee, considering. The whistleblower was completely anonymous. The financial information was routed through proper channels. The security flaws were real, not fabricated. She raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you concerned about?" "Patterns," Jesse replied. "Meetings between us that coincide with key developments in Nextech's collapse. Communications that might suggest coordination. We've been careful. We need to be perfect. Jesse leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking you to lie or obstruct justice. I'm suggesting we ensure our legitimate business connections are properly documented and any personal communications are appropriately private. Greta studied him, her sharp eyes assessing. This is about protecting her, isn't it, Anna? Jesse didn't immediately respond. I thought so, Greta continued. Despite everything she did to you, you're still trying to shield her. This is about ensuring justice remains focused where it belongs, on Hank's actual crimes, Jesse corrected. Widening the investigation unnecessarily helps no one. If you say so. Greta's tone suggested she didn't entirely believe him. Fine. I'll review my records, ensure everything is in order. But Jesse, she fixed him with a pointed look. Be careful mixing strategy with sentiment. It clouds judgment. My judgment is clear, Jesse assured her. Has been from the beginning. As he drove back to his condo, Jesse reflected on Greta's warning. Had sentiment clouded his judgment? Was his concern about the SEC investigation genuinely about maintaining the focus on Hank's crimes, or was it about protecting Anna? He wasn't entirely sure he knew the answer. When he arrived home, he found Anna on the balcony, gazing out at the mountains as evening settled over Asheville. She turned as he joined her, the bruise on her cheek now fading to a yellowish green. Beautiful view, she commented. I could see why you chose this place. Practical location, Jesse replied. Close to the office. Anna smiled faintly. Always practical. Even your aesthetic choices have strategic value. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sky darken over the Blue Ridge Mountains. 8 days, Anna said finally. Then Chicago. Yes. It feels strange. Starting over completely at 35. She glanced at him. But necessary. Fresh starts can be valuable, Jesse agreed. Clean slate. Is that what this is for you? Anna gestured toward the condo. A clean slate, in a manner of speaking. Anna turned to face him fully. Can I ask you something? Something I've wondered since everything fell apart. Jesse nodded once. Was there ever a moment when you considered forgiving me? When you thought about giving us another chance? Her voice was steady, but vulnerability showed in her eyes. Or was it always going to be this calculated destruction once I betrayed you? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken history and complicated emotions. Jesse considered his response carefully. I don't believe in forgiveness as a concept, he said finally. Actions have consequences. Choices create outcomes. That's the nature of reality. That doesn't answer my question. No, Jesse acknowledged. It doesn't. He looked out at the darkening mountains. The truth is, Anna, I never consider reconciliation. Not because of some desire for revenge, but because trust, once broken, cannot be restored to its original state. Like a glass vase, Anna murmured. You can glue it back together, but the cracks always show. It's never the same. An apt metaphor. Anna nodded, accepting this. Thank you for being honest. She turned back to the view. For what it's worth, I understand. I wouldn't trust me either after what I did. The next morning, Jesse was preparing to leave for work when his phone rang. Karen Michaels, Anna's lawyer. Mr. Hale, she began without preamble. I think we have a problem. The prosecutor handling Hank Vance's case called me this morning. Apparently, Mr. Vance is offering information in exchange for leniency. What kind of information? Jesse asked, though he already suspected the answer. He's claiming he has evidence that Anna was working with unnamed conspirators to destroy Nextech from within. That her leaving him was part of a coordinated plan to destabilize the company before the merger. That's absurd, Jesse replied calmly. Anna had no access to the information that ultimately exposed Nextech's problems. I agree, and the prosecutor is skeptical as well. But Vance is desperate, and desperate people make dangerous accusations. Karen's voice was tight with professional concern. He specifically mentioned you, Mr. Hale. Claims you orchestrated the whole thing as revenge for Anna leaving you. Jesse absorbed this information without visible reaction, though Anna, entering the kitchen at that moment, noticed his sudden stillness. I see, he said simply. And is the prosecutor giving these claims any credence? Not yet, but they can't ignore them entirely, especially given the timing of events. Karen sighed. Look, I don't believe there's any substance to these allegations, but I wanted you to be aware. If investigators start looking more closely at your activities during the period when Nextech began to collapse, they won't find anything concerning, Jesse finished confidently. Because there isn't anything to find. After ending the call, he turned to find Anna watching him, her expression troubled. Hank's making accusations, she guessed. About us. Yes. Jesse set his phone down, claiming our actions were coordinated, that your leaving him was part of some elaborate revenge scheme. That's ridiculous, Anna said immediately. I left you for him. Why would I be part of a plan to destroy him? Desperate people construct desperate narratives, Jesse replied, gathering his briefcase. The prosecutor doesn't seem convinced. But they'll investigate, Anna persisted. They have to, now that the accusation has been made. Let them. Jesse's confidence was absolute. There's nothing to find. As he headed for the door, Anna called after him. Jesse, be careful. He's more dangerous than I realized. More unstable. I'm always careful, Anna. That's why his accusations will come to nothing. Throughout the day, Jesse maintained his usual focused efficiency at work, but his mind was processing this new development, adjusting strategies, calculating probabilities. Hank's direct accusation was an escalation, but not an unexpected one. A drowning man would grab at anything, even fabricated conspiracy theories, to save himself. The real concern was the potential for expanded investigation. Even if there was no direct evidence linking Jesse to Nextech's downfall, and he had ensured there wouldn't be, the process itself could be disruptive, damaging to his professional reputation. By evening, he had formulated a countermove. One final strategic adjustment to ensure Hank's accusations would be dismissed entirely. When he returned home, he found Anna packing in the guest room, folding clothes into a suitcase with careful precision. You're leaving? He asked from the doorway. Moving on my departure, she confirmed without looking up. Karen thinks it's best if I'm not in Asheville when Hank starts making these accusations publicly. Less chance of confrontation, less media attention. When? Tomorrow. Now, she did look up, her expression resolute. The Chicago firm is flexible on my start date, and there's nothing keeping me here now that the restraining order is in place and Karen can handle the legal matters remotely. Jesse nodded slowly. That's probably wise. I thought so. Anna resumed her packing. I've imposed on your space long enough anyway. It hasn't been an imposition. She paused, something like surprise flickering across her face. No. Jesse leaned against the doorframe. It's been instructive. Instructive, Anna repeated, a small smile touching her lips. Only you would describe having your ex-wife staying in your home as instructive. I meant that sincerely, Jesse clarified. Seeing you handle the aftermath of your choices with dignity has been unexpected. Anna's hands stilled on the clothes she was folding. That might be the closest thing to a compliment you've given me since everything fell apart. It's an observation, not a compliment. Still, I'll take it. She closed the suitcase. For what it's worth, watching you navigate all this helping me despite what I did, maintaining your composure through everything, it's reminded me why I fell in love with you in the first place. The statement hung between them, neither acknowledgement nor rejection needed. It was simply a truth, offered without expectation. There's something I need to tell you, Jesse said after a moment. About Hank's accusations. Anna straightened, giving him her full attention. What about them? I've been considering the most effective way to neutralize them. He began, choosing his words carefully. The simplest approach would be to provide evidence that there was no coordination between us during the period when Nextech began to collapse. Okay, Anna said slowly. And how would you do that? By demonstrating that we had no contact whatsoever following your departure. That our paths didn't cross again until after Hank's legal troubles began. Jesse met her gaze directly. That would definitively disprove any conspiracy theory. Understanding dawned in Anna's eyes. You want me to confirm we had no contact until recently? Until after everything with Hank fell apart? It would be the truth, Jesse pointed out. We didn't communicate between your departure and your appearance at my door 3 weeks ago. True. Anna studied him thoughtfully. But what about the Turners? Miles saw me at our old house that night, screaming for help. He told you about it. An indirect connection at best, and one we can explain as a neighbor's concern, nothing more. Anna nodded slowly. So that's your plan? Simply demonstrate the lack of contact between us, proving there couldn't have been coordination. It's the most straightforward approach, Jesse confirmed. Simple facts disproving an elaborate conspiracy. It could work, Anna acknowledged. Hank's story requires us to have been in communication, planning together. If we can prove we weren't. She trailed off, then looked at Jesse with sudden insight. But that's not really your plan, is it? There's something else. Jesse hesitated, impressed once again by her perceptiveness. There's a secondary element, he admitted. One that would completely discredit Hank's accusations while simultaneously resolving other complications. Tell me, Anna requested, her voice soft but determined. Greta Vaughn, Jesse said simply. Hank's ex-wife. If investigators follow the threads closely enough, they might eventually discover our connection. That could lend credence to Hank's conspiracy theory, despite the lack of direct evidence. And your solution? I meet with federal investigators voluntarily, Jesse explained. Acknowledge that I did indeed have contact with Greta as an investor interested in her gallery. Purely business-related. No connection to Next Tech. They'll check your finances, Anna pointed out. See if you actually invested in her gallery. I did, Jesse replied. 3 months ago. A substantial amount in a new exhibition she was planning. Anna's eyes widened slightly. You were that thorough? Actually investing real money to create a legitimate business connection? Strategic planning requires attention to detail. Jesse's expression remained neutral. The investment was genuine. The gallery is profitable. And Greta will confirm this story. She already has the documentation prepared. Anna shook her head slowly, a mix of amazement and something like admiration in her expression. You really do think of everything, don't you? I try to anticipate variables, Jesse corrected. It's simply logical planning. Well, your logical planning seems to have covered all the bases. Anna gestured to her suitcase. And with me leaving town tomorrow, Hank's conspiracy theory will collapse completely. No communication between us, a legitimate business relationship with Greta, and the accused co-conspirator moving to another city. Perfect. That's the expectation, yes. Anna sat on the edge of the bed, studying him with renewed intensity. Can I ask you something? You can ask. All of this, the meticulous planning, the perfect execution, the absence of any traceable connection, it worked flawlessly. Hank is destroyed. Next Tech is finished. Justice, as you would call it, has been served. She leaned forward slightly. But has it brought you any peace, Jesse? Any real satisfaction? The question caught him off guard, not because he hadn't considered it, but because he hadn't expected her to articulate it so precisely. Peace is an abstract concept, he replied finally. I prefer concrete outcomes. That's not an answer. No, Jesse acknowledged. It's not. He moved from the doorway, taking a seat in the chair near the window, maintaining physical distance but closing the conversational gap. The truth is, Anna, strategic victory doesn't necessarily equate to emotional resolution, meaning that seeing Hank face consequences for his actions, both professional and personal, was satisfying in a tactical sense. The plan worked exactly as designed. Jesse gazed out the window, his expression contemplative, but it didn't undo what happened between us. It didn't restore what was broken. Nothing could, Anna said softly. Some things, once broken, stay broken. Like your vase metaphor. Exactly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history and separate futures hanging between them. For what it's worth, Anna said finally, I think you're the most remarkable person I've ever known. Even in orchestrating my downfall, because let's be honest, my fate was tied to Hank's in your calculations. You did it with such precision that I can only admire the execution. It wasn't about your downfall, Jesse clarified. It was about consequences finding their appropriate targets. Semantics, Anna smiled sadly. But I understand the distinction. She stood, moving to the window near his chair. "I leave tomorrow. We'll likely never see each other again, except perhaps at a distance at some charity function years from now." "Likely not," Jesse agreed. "Chicago is a different world. So this is goodbye then." Anna's voice was steady, resigned. "The end of our story." Jesse looked up at her, seeing not the woman who had betrayed him, nor the broken figure who had appeared at his door weeks later, but simply Anna, complex, flawed, human. "Not the end," he corrected. "Simply the conclusion of this chapter." Always so precise with language, Anna smiled faintly. "I'll miss that." The next morning, Jesse helped load Anna's luggage into the taxi that would take her to the airport. Their farewell was brief, practical, no dramatic embraces or tearful promises. Simply acknowledgement of a shared past and separate futures. "Thank you," Anna said as she prepared to enter the taxi. "For everything. Despite what I did, you helped me when I needed it most." "Take care of yourself, Anna," Jesse replied. "And good luck in Chicago." She hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded and got into the taxi. Jesse watched it pull away from the curb, turn the corner, and disappear from view. Later that day, he met voluntarily with federal investigators, explaining his business relationship with Greta Vaughn, providing documentation of his investment in her gallery, and calmly addressing Hank's conspiracy accusations with factual timelines that proved their impossibility. The investigators, clearly skeptical of Hank's claims to begin with, seemed satisfied with Jesse's explanations. By the following week, news reports indicated that prosecutors had rejected Hank's offer of information in exchange for leniency, deeming his accusations without merit. Justice, it seemed, would focus precisely where it belonged, on Hank's actual crimes, not fabricated conspiracies. 3 months later, Jesse sat on the balcony of his downtown condo, watching the sun rise over Asheville. The morning air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn as golden light spilled across the mountains. His phone lay on the table beside him, open to a news article announcing Hank Vance's guilty plea on multiple counts of securities fraud and investor deception. The former tech visionary would serve at least 5 years in federal prison, with millions in fines and restitution to follow. Nextech, once valued at over $500 million, had been sold for assets at pennies on the dollar. Justice, cold and complete. Sophie joined him on the balcony, coffee in hand, having stayed overnight after their dinner the previous evening. "So it's official," she said, nodding toward his phone. "Hank's going to prison." "Yes." "And Anna? Any word?" Jesse shook his head. "Nothing direct. I heard through Karen Michaels that she's settled in Chicago. The marketing firm is pleased with her work. And that's it. The end of the story." Sophie studied her brother over her coffee cup. "You orchestrated the perfect revenge. Hank destroyed. Anna taught a lesson. Both of them facing the consequences of their choices. And now life just continues." "Life always continues," Jesse replied, watching a red-tailed hawk circle above the city. "That's its nature." "Deep," Sophie said dryly. "But you know what I'm asking. After all that planning, all that calculated strategy, was it worth it? Did it give you what you wanted?" Jesse considered the question, not for the first time. "It gave me justice. Consequences aligned with actions." "That's the strategic answer," Sophie persisted. "What about the human answer? Are you satisfied? Happy? At peace?" The hawk dove suddenly, plummeting toward an unseen target before pulling up and soaring again, emptied alone. Jesse tracked its flight, considering his response. "I'm recalibrating," he said finally. "Moving forward." Sophie nodded, understanding the limitations of what her brother could express. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you've handled all of this with remarkable composure." "Thank you." Jesse turned from the hawk to meet his sister's gaze. "And thank you for your support throughout." "That's what family does," Sophie replied simply. "We stand together when it matters." They sat in companionable silence, watching the city come alive below them. Jesse's thoughts turned briefly to Anna, wondering if she was watching a similar sunrise over Chicago's skyline, building her new life.